how the reason why you have blacks in different places is because the residential patterns in the state are still reflective of where enslaved communities lived along this particular river system. And that residential segregation, along with disparities in political power, economic status, health outcomes, all of these things are existent today because they reflect institutional choices that are traceable to Jim Crow and reproduced through contemporary practices. That last part is a quote from them. So I appreciate that you want to say when the state comes with their new map, we have to look at the extent to which in drawing it, they have departed from traditional principles on racial grounds. What I'm suggesting is what do we do with the situation in which the state keeps presenting the same map? They're not departing, their map looks fine, but because of all of these race-based effects, because of the history of Jim Crow, which I appreciate happened a long time ago, but I'm positing, and Gingles allows for us to see where those effects are still occurring. I hear your test not allowing us to solve for that problem when the state is continuing to present the same map under circumstances in which people are not actually being able to have equal electoral opportunity.
So I guess I'll say three things about that, Your Honor. The first is, again, our position, it does not require intent. I agree that at step one, we're saying you have to consider race-neutral principles, but if they've departed from that, we think you could find liability based on the effect without making a finding that they did it for intentional discriminatory reasons. Now, second, you pointed to the fact that it's possible that these effects stem from long distance.
Can I just ask you, why do they have to depart? What if they just keep on doing the same thing? They're not changing the map. I thought Section 2's whole point was that you gotta offer a remedy, you gotta have a remedy where this thing is happening. So the well-intentioned state with no intent to discriminate says, the census has changed, this is where people live, but we're just gonna provide our same map. And if we can determine that that map, under those circumstances, is not providing for electoral opportunity, regardless of whether they've departed from traditional principles, I thought you had to solve for that.
And I guess our point is you don't.
You don't. It's only where they depart from traditional principles.
It's only where you could say that it's either intentionally or likely intentionally discriminatory.
So intent does come in.
You don't have to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence.
I see.
It's any other results test.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Rebuttal, Ms. Nelson.
28 months ago, this court made it pellucidly clear that Section 2 is constitutional and that there needs not be a race-neutral map that is presented as part of the illustrative maps. Many questions that are presented by my opponents on the other side have been asked and answered in Milligan. What is also clear is that Louisiana is emblematic of the ongoing need for Section 2. For example, we're talking about how close this may come to intent or results. If we look simply at the evidence here in Louisiana, we see that Louisiana had shifting justifications for its map whenever it was presented with a map that met or beat its criteria and gave black voters an equal opportunity to participate in the process. It rejected those maps. The court in Robinson also relied on the fact that there has never been a black candidate elected on a statewide basis. Even when white Democrats won an election in 2019, black Democrats lost. My opponents here would like to make this a partisan issue because they believe the case law will enable their case to prevail, but it does not. This is about race. Section 2 and the Voting Rights Act is laser focused on eliminating racial discrimination from our electoral process, regardless of party. And if we look at many of the black Congress people who were elected, they came out of Section 2 opportunity districts. They don't have to be majority-minority districts. Many of them are crossover districts. And so if we remove Section 2, we also recognize that there will likely be a resurgence of discrimination because Section 2 plays a deterrent effect. states are drawing maps with Section 2 in mind. In fact, Local Rule 21 in Louisiana says that the state must comply with Section 2. The fact that HB1, which was the original map, was pre-cleared by the Department of Justice means very little. Retrogression is an entirely different standard from what Section 2 is looking at. Retrogression means the state of Louisiana cannot go backwards. Section 2 is talking about whether there is active discrimination right now preventing the additional opportunities for Black voters who meet all of the Gingles preconditions to have an equal opportunity to participate in the process. Requiring plaintiffs to control for party is helpful if that evidence exists, and it did to some extent in Robinson, where we put on evidence about Democratic elections and the preferences of white voters that still preferred white Democrats over Black Democrats. But that is not the only question. If that evidence is available, and I will remind the court it's not often available if there aren't primary elections or if we are looking at more down ballot elections, not just the congressional elections at issue here, that evidence is useful. But if there is significant racially polarized voting, that has already been shown to be probative of intentional, of discrimination that comes very close to intentional discrimination. What Congress did in Section 2 was strike a very careful balance of using factors like white re-register, like the Zimmer factors, to bring us as close to a finding of intent without making the full accusation and without requiring that conclusion on the part of courts. So we should not downplay, as my opponents have, the robust nature and exacting requirements of a Gingles test, and also remind ourselves that the City of Rome in 1980 made very clear that Congress can address effects beyond what the 15th Amendment requires. I'll close by saying that in Bush v. Vera, this court said that it must be particularly concerned about changing its decisions or rejecting stare decisis in cases that involve a sensitive political context like this one. That calls the court's legitimacy into question in a unique way. My opponents here have not done the labor of showing that precedent should be overturned. They haven't addressed Janus, they haven't addressed Ramos. They've simply said that we should overturn or tweak the precedent that governs Section 2, and I would say that there's no record to support that in this case, and this court would be remiss to not require that if it is entertaining any significant modifications of Section 2. Any further neutering of Section 2 would resurrect the 15th Amendment as a mere parchment promise, and we ask the court to remand.
Good everything.
Good everything. Good everything. Nothing better than starting the day with two Black women at the top of their game.
Okay, so the first voice we heard was Ketanji Onyeka Jackson, Supreme Court Justice extraordinaire. Who's that last?
Does that name get any blacker?
No, yeah, it can. You know, she could put a Tamika. It could be in there with Anika next.
Yeah. I guess she could.
She could put a second one.
Yeah, an Ebonics name, because them first two names were continental African languages. That's
Correct.
true. The Brown.
Correct.
Well, no, the Brown stands in place of the Tamika, because that's a good Black name, Black, Brown. And even though her husband is white, what kind of trick the ancestors pulled to give him the last name Jackson? I mean, the whole thing just comes together.
I did a little deep dive on him this week for a project that I'm working on, and it's God is in everything. There's a reason for everything, and we have to just be accepting and be obedient. But I had to write down a word I had never heard, but I knew what it meant because of the context in which it was used, and then I didn't know how to spell it, so I had to go and put the different versions of it. But when she said pellucid, now I can't even pronounce it. Pellucidly. She said pellucidly, P-E-L-L, 2 L's. I'm P-E-L-L-U-C-I-D-L-Y. That's going to be a word of the day on my show, but I knew what it meant because of how she used it, but it's very clear, transparent, easy to understand. She said, y'all made it
transparent, lucid.
lucidly clear. Lucid, but also,
pellucidly clear.
Yeah. There. Amazing.
Except if you just deliberately, shout out to Beer Kavanaugh, deliberately trying to make stuff up. I gotta give Brett Kavanaugh credit, man. You talk about somebody pulling stuff out of his behind and showing it to the world.
But
just love it.
Dr. Carr, first of all, like, who's that last voice we heard?
Yes, that's Janai Nelson, who is the leader of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, who was brilliant in her arguments throughout the arc of the Louisiana versus Callais Voting Rights Act case. And the reason everybody knows that we decided to play that this morning, even though it was a little long, is to give a little bit of the flavor of the distinction between when you are clear about what the law says and when you're trying to pull a fast one. So that's it, as was the Chief Deputy Solicitor General, who was the man who was speaking, Hashem Mapos, who was when he clerked at the Supreme Court, clerked for Anthony Scalia. This is white supremacy being eviscerated by two women, one who's on the bench now. Now, I tell you, those of you who want to get a little bit deeper into it, you can, obviously what we played is widely available. The Supreme Court actually now is broadcasts the oral arguments in real time, and you can find it anywhere out there. If you really want to have a nice flavor for those two sisters, go back a little when they're talking to each other. That's what I'm saying. I mean, so those of you who say, well, reading is passe and I got TikTok. Okay, you should sit still and decide how you want to contribute to the ongoing struggle for liberation. But if you opt out of that deep intellectual work, please don't comment on it. Don't have any comment on it because you don't know anything about it. I'm thinking now about particularly some of the more loud-mouthed public commentators who have opinions about Black women. You should keep your lips sealed, sir. Frankly speaking, if I wanted to. But anyway, I'm just saying, when you hear them talking with each other, that's what it looks like. That's why you go to school, y'all. That's why you read. That's why you get your homework. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, go.
Janai Nelson, Janai. If people want to go down a rabbit hole and study her
please.
as well, which you should.
Please.
Couple of things. First of all, that was how many hours of this oral argument did you listen to?
Well, it's the whole thing, but you play what you played there. I think ends around the 2 hour and 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's how long it was.
Okay. You talk about people doing this work, but this is not the society that we live in. People aren't going to do the work, which is why I welcome everybody to In Class with Carr. We're here 293 now consecutive Saturdays, and we've sprinkled some in between, and we've done some extra stuff. If you're on the Narrative platform, you'll see, that work, and it's. I come here every Saturday because I know it's important, and I'm so grateful and I'm so thankful that we have somebody that when I have an idea or it's something that I want to get, you have the deep work. You've done the deep work. So I just want to say thank you. And the breadcrumbs that we drop here, it is a challenge. Dr. Daniel Black does this rites of passage virtually now, and it's been incredible. This morning was challenging for me because I had, we're taxed this week to spend 1 hour not sleeping, but in complete silence. Now, I know
anything with that.
You can't read.
You
can't read. Just be still. Now, I'm used to being by myself, and I read. I have some, earphones in. I'm listening to things. I'm typing. I'm, answering email. I'm doing, I'm busy, even though I'm alone and silent. But to be silent with yourself and not sleeping, you start to realize,
Yes, there you go. Tell us about it.
Start to realize how much you don't spend time with yourself. And you also start to realize how much you don't really listen to your inner voice, because when do you have time to do that when you're not? And it's just 1 hour, Dr. Carr. And I was struggling because I got up at 5:53. I know the exact time. So I said I got until 6:53, to have this. Well, actually, I got up at 4 something, went to the gym because I knew I had to have that hour between now and then. So I went to the gym, got there at 5, and then left, just did a quick workout. And then I was like, okay, I have from 5:53 to 6:53 to just be silent. And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting. I was like, and I realized in that moment, I was like, I've never done this. Really, all week. So it's been all week. And I realized I've never done this. Not really. And I know there are monks that go into the mountains and they, but my goodness, to spend time with yourself, you start to really examine, your whole entire life in a different way. And I think, for us with our busy lives, to sit and read is one thing, to sit and study is another thing. And those are two different things. But to sit in silence with yourself, I think everybody should do that, at least for 1 week out of your life.
So were you visited by anyone? You don't have to say.
Yeah, no, we're going to have a discussion on Sunday. That's part of the, I'm sharing just a little bit, but I think it's important, and I'm so eternally grateful to you, because I wouldn't know this man without you and this experience, but we're all seeking, right? And that's the charge, right? To seek, knock, ask. Most of us are too busy talking and telling people stuff we don't know. So
how about that? Yikes. How about that? I left my tea in the other room, but I'm gonna go get it.
I'll drink some for you.
But yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. No, I mean, it's important. I mean, it's interesting. I think about, talked about her before, Aisha Imani, who was the leader, founder of Sankofa Freedom Academy in Philly. My friend, our sister. We worked many years together in freedom schools. And when I first met Aisha, this would have been around 1990, maybe 3 or 4. She was teaching at William Penn High School. She's trained in mathematics, but she was leading a small learning community in William Penn. And her students were always late to class, the class after her class. And the students who came in the next session of her classes would always be standing outside waiting patiently, because when whoever was speaking at the moment when they were finishing a point in the class, everybody would wait until they finished saying what they were saying and say, okay, now we can go. And her line to them always was, we're human beings. We don't react to bells. We react to each other. So it's like deep listening. So they would always be late because somebody was saying something. We're not going to cut you off. You finish. But the other thing she would often say, and I've seen her do this when we were going down regularly, assisting with the Children's Defense Fund, the National Freedom Schools, before we left and did our own thing. We sometimes they would have her come in and speak to the whole Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools, and it might be 1,000 kids there. So we'd be on the farm, the Haley Farm in Tennessee, and under this big white tent, and everybody's there. And she'd be on the stage and say, okay, everybody be quiet. And invariably you might hear some, no, we'll wait. And she would say, the most difficult thing for us is to be quiet, because you can't hide from yourself. And so when you're quiet, now you're presented with the person that you might have been running from. You got to make a little noise. You got to shuffle a little bit. Why? Because I need something to keep me from. And I think about it because I do spend times in silence, including right before we do this, if I can. Sometimes I'm reading the paper. But then it feeds into that as well, because when we are completely silent, we're not alone. That is the most expansive definition of community we will experience as beings. We're never alone. So what ends up in now for me, that's when I probably have the most clear conversations with, even when I'm being silent and cycling. People tell you clear your mind. Absolutely. Well, that's probably, my father is probably the most consistent conversation I will have in the deep silence. You know what I'm saying? And my mom left so with my daddy, and then from then all the ancestors beyond that, some of whom I knew when I was a little boy who made transition, and then the ones I will never meet physically, they all come. When you are silent, that's when you're never alone. That's when you discover, oh, this is what the community is. And then suddenly I'll read or something. Sometimes people put on music. I don't need nothing. You don't need that. If there's music you love, it's gonna come to you in the silence. It's not go. That's what John Coltrane went up on the second floor of that house in Dix Hills in New York and wrote "A Love Supreme." And Alex Coltrane said he would come down every once in a while, get a little something to eat, and then he would go back up. He would get the food and take it back up to that little bedroom. And he came out finally said, "This is it. That's how we got a love supreme." It was in the silence. So that's why I asked. So I know that conversation y'all gonna have is gonna be.
And we're of course reading Malidoma Somé. So, you know, the chapter that I'm in right now, he fell asleep in the cemetery and got separated, you know, and like, but his father knew all the way a day's journey away that something was wrong with his baby, you know. The connection that we need, and you brought up Brett Kavanaugh, and you know, we're in a world full of disconnected, wayward, unsettled, unformed, undisciplined spirits who have now power that they never deserved, and they know they didn't deserve it. So he's sitting among the giant brain of Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor, and even Elena Kagan. He's surrounded by brilliance that he knows he can't stack up to. Amy Coney Barrett never even tried a case. They are inferior intellects, and so they have to make up for that with, you know, you mentioned somebody, you know, you make up for that with the bravado. You always know you talking loud saying nothing, because inside your spirit you know you're a fraud. You know, we know.
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows. That's a man. You said a word there. There really are no illusions, and you know they're talking about maps in this decision. Not decision. Decision will be next year sometime. We don't know. If they're really up to their nastiest evil, it will come early in the year, because they're trying to get at the midterm elections. What they're trying to do. If they kick the teeth out of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, you could lose at least a dozen, maybe as many as double that seats in the South. It will be blood red, except for a little blue around Atlanta, a little blue around Charlotte. It'll be red Louisiana, red Mississippi, red Alabama, you know, red Georgia, except for Atlanta. And you're going to lose probably a third, maybe as much as a third of the Congressional Black Caucus. So this is the attempt of the white nationalists to do that. So
right. So I was gonna ask you, you know, first why we started here. I already know, but I want you to kind of walk us through it. But also, you know, 10 years ago in 2015, when I was on the radio a year, I said, why don't we start running people as Republicans? Since they've gerrymandered, a Democrat can't win in these districts. So run your good people and put an R next to their name. Do whatever you need to do, Father. They'll take anybody, because Marjorie Taylor Greene's in Congress. Damn, they'll take anybody. People with cloven hoofs, folk that can't read, people can't graduate from high school, like Lauren Bobbitt and all these other folk. They take anybody. All you got to do is pretend like Joe Manchin and them pretended, you know. Yeah, America first. You know, talking points, and get elected, because they don't show up for the primaries. Marjorie Taylor Greene ran unopposed in Georgia. They don't show up for the primaries anyway. We just got to be strategic, because they're doing it. They have the power to do it. It's going to be done. So I'm not going to sit here and complain about it. Let's strategize now. We got a year. Get it together. It doesn't take long. So what did you get out of watching this in terms of, like, because most of us don't even realize how the Voting Rights Act even impacts our lives, or why we should be voting. People still saying you know, my vote doesn't matter. How many percentage of people stayed out of the New Orleans election?
Yes.
Recently, like 57% of the people didn't show up to vote for their own mayor. So now you got a mayor that doesn't look like you. And I'm not saying she's a bad person, but like, you didn't show up for yourself. So what does that even mean?
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to understand that what we just heard and the history behind it reveals, and I want, the two of us talking about this, why independent Black politics is important for this reason. And Attorney Nelson makes this point, and Justice Brown Jackson makes this point as well. And the point is made throughout the oral arguments. And I've heard Gary Chambers make this point over and over again. You heard in the back and forth that, and Janai Nelson said this, when the Democrats won statewide in Louisiana, 2019, the Black Democrats running on that slate did not win statewide. The ugly truth of the matter is that white Democrats don't vote for Black Democrats in the same percentage as they vote for white ones. So if you run as a Republican, this is a nasty little lesson that Winston Earl Sears is about to find out next month in Virginia. There's no one more Stephen-esque, and I'm talking, of course, about Stephen in Django. There's no one more Stephen-esque than Winston Earl and Sears in Virginia. This is a Black woman running for governor of Virginia against a deeply flawed soft white nationalist Democratic candidate, Abigail Spanberger, who many people of African descent in Virginia will hold their noses and vote for. But there will be thousands of white Republicans who simply cannot stomach voting for a Black woman. That's one of the reasons she's going to lose. So she's running as a Republican. She can't get any more. If she had 50 toes, it would be 50 toes now for Donald Trump and MAGA, but she's Black woman. So they're not going to vote in the percentage. On the other side of the alleged divide, and I don't do DR or left, right, or no, this is fascism and everybody versus fascism. That's why the independent Black power politics is very important. On the other side, there is a candidate for Attorney General in Virginia, Mr. Jones, who made some unfortunate exchanges, had some unfortunate cyber exchanges, and which he talked about metaphorical death, bullets, kind of thing, nasty stuff. And the Democratic Party has not come out to full throat support him. This is a case where whataboutism would be very interesting. So I'm saying what you'll hear in this oral argument, so what you see in the data, which is what Janai said at the end, y'all haven't done y'all homework. Y'all really not prepared for this. If y'all gonna decide something, you need to send it back down to the court and let them come back up. When you look at the patterns, white people don't vote for Black people in the same percentage Black people vote for white people. I don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats. So that's really the answer in some ways to that. Not that it wouldn't be important, but yeah.
No, that's why I said it's up to us, in those closed primary states to be more civically knowledgeable, to know, oh, I'm in a closed primary state. Somebody said, well, I'm an independent. Your independence is great. I'm independent as well. But the I is not going to get there's no candidate on the ballot for you to vote for. So you don't have any power during a primary. Like, we don't even know that. I'm independent. Yes, good. Who's your candidate? Who's on the ballot? No, there are no independent candidates. This is a closed primary state. There's no candidate. You can't even vote in your primary as an independent. So if you're in this red state of Alabama, Mississippi, whatever, and there's going to be red and you're a Democrat registered, this is not about ideals. This is about power, right? And they're playing the game. So we at least need to know the rules and act accordingly, which is the saddest thing that, we get caught up in. They're racist. Yes, they're never going to vote for you. They don't like you. They're going to vote overwhelmingly for themselves. So what are we doing? And it's not about shilling for the Democrats. It's about knowing that I need rights and resources where I live. How do I get them? And if you're not having that conversation with the people in your group and the folk on the ground there, and I get why people sit home, because it's frustrating as hell to sit and watch the same people. And then some people who look like you, and I'm not talking about, somebody said, win some, lose some. I like that. I'm not talking about that lady. I'm talking about the people who are supposed to be, who can rhyme well and they know Biggie lyrics and they're out there in them streets doing all of the things that you think you make you feel good and proud, but you don't have anything to show for it. Cory Booker getting his ass handed to him on a podcast with two ladies. I said, man, Good for you. Good. I'm glad it happened. It couldn't have happened to a better person, because we now have to stop deifying these folk. It's not about them, it's about us. And let's grow up and start, acting accordingly and putting everybody on notice. So that's all.
It's no. It's an important. This is the conversation we had to have. Politicians are not our friends. They're means to an end. If they so happen to be statesperson-like, that's beautiful. But they're really not necessary. It's not necessary. I mean, you see a full-bred stooge out of Louisiana, the MAGA Muppet, Mike Johnson, who is so deeply and severely flawed, not only as a politician, but in many other ways. He's just a means to an end. He's just a device. And so, yeah, politicians are not our friends. I think every strategy should be on the table. I think they have to be deeply informed by study and practice, so that, well, I don't divide those two things, because study is practice. They have to be deeply involved by study and being in deep community. And then we make those choices and we explain those choices. I think people are very clear in the on the YouTube side. Saw, as it was going by, Brother Asuki Bandele said, this is our work. And, he said that one of the things he's doing is translating this, kind of a hood translator. I understand the sentiment and I embrace it and agree with it. And I also understand that I don't make a distinction between the hood and anywhere else when there is common work being done. We all had a capacity to do the same work differently. And glad to see Bishop Charles over there said, I love Gary Chambers, but Malcolm Kenyatta is destroying any of the competition in Philadelphia. Indeed, I wouldn't put a but there. I wouldn't put that conjunction there, because it makes, I think it creates the assumption that there's a co-equal distinction to be made. Gary Chambers is in Louisiana telling people you need to register and vote. You need to get in here and participate in the process. Every day he was talking about that with the New Orleans mayoral election, whereas Malcolm Kenyatta is in Philly, North Philly, office right there across in Progress Plaza, where the Lion of Zion and that crew, talking about Leon Sullivan and them, made those advances years ago. So yeah, Malcolm's deep in the heart of Pennsylvania now. When you put him on the stage there, as he is a state representative in the state of Pennsylvania, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And of course, you talk about the Democratic National Committee, and we all remember a few months ago the role there as it related to David Hogg. How do you capture the state apparatus, as you say? As Zorhan Mamdani has been saying and continues to say, you got to win elections in order to implement any form of policy making that you want to do. And so that is the real politic of it. Absolutely. And when people say, well, why would you do that? Why would you register as a Republican? Why would you? Hey, everybody calm down. Because remember, we had the independent meeting. We had the Black Political Party meeting. We had the community meeting. We had the study group. We had the convening where we just sat and talked through politics. So when you made a certain tactical move, it was clear that was a tactical move. It was not an ideological move designed to align yourself with any position in the apparatus. It is your determination to seize the apparatus for your own ends. Senator Booker understands that, unfortunately, as people continue to educate themselves and as things become unavoidable, like the slaughter in Gaza. Shout out to the Israeli Defense Force, who continues to slaughter. At least 28 more people have died since the quote unquote ceasefire, including they just killed 11 people in one family. 7 children, 3 women, 1 man, as their car came to inspect what used to be their home before the Israeli Defense Force reduced it to rubble. Your tax dollars at work. Beat the international criminal and his cabal killing people. They've slaughtered 11 people yesterday in that process. And I'm saying all that because, and they said, by the way, that these people had crossed some kind of yellow line. It was part of negotiated ceasefire. But of course, these people don't have the internet, no satellite phones, nothing. They don't know where the yellow line is. So basically, the IDF is engaged in target practice as we speak right now, which is consistent with their bloodthirsty actions. You killers. But I'm raising all that up because Senator Booker has not said one mumbling word about that. Certainly not during his, 70, 80, 90, I think 100,000 hour filibuster or whatever it was. But at any rate, not one word about Gaza, in part because if you read The Nation magazine this week, a long article talking about the number of elected officials, a number of Congress people in the Congressional Black Caucus who received, and in Cory Booker's case, over $900,000 total from AIPAC. So yeah, you can quote Biggie lyrics like Congressman Jeffries, or you can filibuster like Senator Booker. Doesn't make them bad people, doesn't make them good people. Does, however, reveal the fact that there are formations in the social structure that we live in who know exactly how to use the state apparatus to achieve their goal. And in the case of AIPAC, as Jimmy Carter said, I'm not mad at AIPAC. They have one issue only, one issue only. We're going to skate to one record. Ball so hard. MF's trying to find me. First, they got to find me. This is AIPAC in Paris, or AIPAC in Washington, perhaps. One issue, one song. We're going to skate to one song. We'll defend and protect Israel at all costs. Jimmy Carter, I ain't mad at them. My question is what the rest of y'all doing. And so to your point, what issues we have, that issues agenda, whether it be 1972 Gary, whether it be the Million Man March, the 30th anniversary of which we just celebrated this past week and continue to celebrate this weekend here in Washington, D.C., whether it be whatever the issue is, if you've got an issues agenda, 5 points, 10 points, 30 points, however they are, you take that agenda, see which employees, political employees in terms of politicians, align with that agenda, and then move accordingly. Take the D and the R off, take the labels off, do that exercise, go down the list with your, and then see how they fit with each other. Please understand that. That's why study is important, because there are people who would say, you can't criticize AIPAC because it's anti-Semitic. And I would be quick to remind them that we're not talking about Jews. We're talking about AIPAC. It's a different conversation. Because if we were talking about Jews, then you'd be talking about the Falasha, the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, the number of people who are not of European descent, direct European descent, who are Jewish. If you want to talk about the Jews, whatever that means. But I'm saying all that as a prelude and a backdrop to this. This week, as we listen to that argument in the Supreme Court, which is about maps and lines, but really about something much more different, which is much deeper, which is politics and power. And we realize that this weekend, as people are saying in both the chats and the Mbongi, that this is the No Kings, the second iteration of No Kings with Indivisible. Barbara Russ, you're a well-trained lawyer. Those of you not in Nubia, Russ Smith was one of our stalwart members of Nubia Nation, the thousands who were in there. And maybe come here Monday, because your insights of the law are always so very illuminating. And he said, well, you didn't have time to listen to oral arguments of the Supreme Court. I understand the frustration, brother, because sometimes, because you could do it. I know you've done it many times before, but you might read the transcript. But when you hear the disingenuity, I was joking with my students the other day. I said, I could see in my mind Brett Kavanaugh reaching behind his back and under his judicial robe and extracting out of his hind parts the most absurd public statement I could imagine in a moment like that, when he suggested that, at some point these things have to end. These guarantees are not guarantees. These remedies have to end. These, what's the expiration date on maybe Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act? He didn't say that explicitly, but he was coming to it. And of course, Attorney Nelson had to remind everyone that the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and for those who perhaps haven't read it in ever, here it is. 15th Amendment is written in the Constitution. It is not the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, proposed February 26, 1869, ratified February the 3rd, 1870. And it says, Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That's it. That's it. Now, Section 2 of the 15th Amendment says the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. That's it. So the Voting Rights Act is pursuant to Section 2 of the 15th Amendment, which is permanent. Well, at least as long as there's United States, and it may not be a United States much longer. But we'll see. But in that process, Justice Kavanaugh, as you reached into your hind parts and decided that you would replace the will of Congress with your made up, well, it's got to end sometime. At least you didn't go as far as Sandra Day O'Connor, who in the Michigan line of cases in affirmative action put an expiration date on affirmative action of 25 years. I think she pulled that number out of her hind parts, but at least she had been a legislator in Arizona. At least she had participated in the process of redistricting and the process of understanding how laws are made more generally, more broadly. But you, Beer Kavanaugh, Mr. I like beer. You also like pulling random out of your, come on, bruh. You know what? You should sit at the feet of Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson. and listen to her as she went through the reality that where Black people live in the state of Louisiana is very much shaped by where they lived during captivity. So whether you want to go back, and she said, I understand that was a long time ago. That was a kind of shade diss at Beer and his friends. A long time ago, whatever the hell that means. But you know what was longer than a long time ago? A long, long time ago during captivity. You know what was longer than that? Everything that came before it. So let's be clear. The places we were hoarded into captivity became the places that were replicated from which we did not move during the period of apartheid. Jim and Jane Crow became the places where we continue to be trapped in the class structure in Louisiana and in this country. So when you draw a map, and what did she say? I love, man, Ketanji Brown. Oh, she said they keep drawing the same map. But you act somehow as if you drawing the same map is going to somehow remedy the challenge. The challenge is not majority Black districts. See, they have to call them majority minority because people of African descent right now are a minority in this polity. But in a minute, ain't nobody going to be the majority. So I don't use majority minority language. What I use is, I got to call a thing because you heard section 1 and 2 of the 15th Amendment. That's the whole amendment. And what they are doing now is trying to create a class, a protected class called, what should I call it? Let me think. Oh, yes, white people. White people. In other words, as white people become one of the many minorities in this country, they want to be a protected class. So they're saying the 15th Amendment is for us too. The answer is, of course it is, but it's not for you to replicate your white dominance, which is what you're trying to sneak in here, Mr. Solicitor General. And the irony of it, he's of Indian descent. But you know, like Clarence Thomas, you can be a servant of white supremacy and not look that way, right, Stephen? From Django. The point is that the idea that you can get at a remedy and put an expiration date on it by pretending that the conditions don't exist, that's a direct violation of the 15th Amendment through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And they kept quoting the Alabama case, which they just decided a couple of years ago. This was the Milligan case, the Milligan versus Allen, which was 3 years ago, not even quite, just about 3 years, just a little over 3 years ago, where the Alabama maps were said to have violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And I'm not going to get too deep into this. We could talk about it a whole lot more if y'all want during office hours, everybody in Nubia, and let's bring in some more of these legal minds. We got some crack minds in there can come in and really flesh this out. But I'll just mention this as well. You'll hear, if you listen to the oral arguments, a lot of discussion of the test by which you want to evaluate a claim under the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act basically says you, pursuant to the 15th Amendment, you cannot diminish somebody's vote based on race. So there was a case from 1986 called Thornberg versus Gingles. You heard it a lot. That case, you heard Justice Brown Jackson refer to it. There's a 3-part framework the Supreme Court set out to evaluate claims brought under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And as John Roberts said during his confirmation hearings many years ago, he's put on the bench by George W. Bush, if y'all remember. He says it's the job of the court to say what the law is. Yeah, the law is in plain language, and you shouldn't be trying to make stuff up if it don't go the way you want it to go. It is the job of the court to say what the law is, but it's not the job of the court to make stuff up. But again, that's what all these decisions are ultimately. In some ways, it's them interpreting, and they put their politics in it. And this is why when they lead with, I'm just calling balls and strikes, that's probably that's the one you got to look at the closest. That's the one you got to look at the closest. That's the one with the agenda, isn't it? Mr. Bush versus Gore lawyer John Roberts, eventually appointed to the Supreme Court by the guy who you helped get in office in the first place. But this is the test they put up. This test isn't in the Constitution. It is in the Voting Rights Act. The test is in the court's interpretation. And the court's interpretation, increasingly now, what they hide behind is, well, Congress needs to clarify this. Congress needs to clarify this. This happened in the Voting Rights Act in 1982. They made an amendment because it was a 1980 Supreme Court case that said that you had to show intent to discriminate. And Congress at that time was like, oh, hell no. You don't have to show intent. Let's just stop the court from telling that lie. Remember, Congress has the power to pass legislation pursuant to the amendments of the Constitution and to the Constitution, not the courts. But the way the courts can get around this, if you get the right ideologues on there, they can interpret it and say, well, that's not what Congress meant. What? Y'all seeing it right now. Remember Joe Biden tried to forgive your student loans and the court said, no, the Congress got the power to that. Remember when Donald Trump was trying to send troops into your mama's house and the Supreme Court said, well, we'll rule on the merits, but in the meantime, maybe we'll let him do it. In other words, wait a minute, what changed? Oh, the president changed. Got it. So it's not quite the same, but one is a substantive reading of the law. That's in the case of Biden. One is forestalling the inevitable, where they're going to have to decide on whether or not what you said about Biden applies to Trump too. But in the meantime, Trump keeps running back to the court. He just did it again with regard to sending troops into Chicago. And what they call the rocket docket, the court says, well, until we decide on the merits, we're going to let you go ahead and do what you want to do. This is the nasty part of this. And sometimes they let Biden do it, sometimes they didn't. But anyway, I was going down the rabbit hole a little bit on that. The Thornberg case from 1986 sets out a 3-part test to see whether you violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act when you draw in these districts. First, the person who is saying that you did has to prove that the minority group that they're worried about is sufficiently large and geographically compact enough to constitute a majority in a reasonably configured district. What's reasonably configured? You draw a S, you draw a zigzag, you excluded all these other people. There was a 15th Amendment case in Tuskegee from Alabama. This is the one that Fred Gray argued. This is Dr. Charles Gamillion versus Lightfoot, where these white boys in Alabama had figured out a way to draw however many sided thing they had that excluded every black voter in the city of Tuskegee. Now that just failed. They won that case at the Supreme Court. Fast forward to now, they're drawing all kind of weird districts, connecting little districts, kind of exclude people, include people. They say it's for political reasons, and the court has said y'all can do that for political reasons. But if it gets too extreme, too absurd, then they say, wait a minute, hold on, you violated Section 2. Second, the plaintiffs must show that the minority group is politically cohesive. Now that gets a little tricky. You heard Beer Kavanaugh, talking about political consciousness versus or consciousness. He didn't say political consciousness, but like, what are you saying? You assume that because somebody looks a certain way, they're going to vote a certain way. That is true to a point, but it's not so true that you can assume that that's what's going to happen if you pack this district with a bunch of black people or a bunch of non-white people. It's very important to understand much of this is just based on interpretation. So when you start putting data in, the arguments that the white nationalists make fall apart. There was an argument that the Solicitor General made during the oral arguments this week, where he said, only like 15 of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus right now in the United States Congress are elected from districts where black people are the majority. He's making that point, or he's making that observation to try to hide the idea that you don't need what they call opportunity districts. Now, Attorney Nelson reminded the court and reminds us that, just because black people aren't the majority doesn't mean that you aren't very consciously seeing a shaving of a percentage of black people out of a district so that they don't have the opportunity to win. Or put another way, Justice Brown Jackson from the bench during the oral is that they're not asking for a majority black district. Nice try, sir. Ain't nobody said nothing about no majority black district. Opportunity means maybe you got 35 or 40% black. And then you bust your ass like Natasha Brown and, Cliff Albright and Black Voters Matter or whoever the formations are. You get people registered to vote, you turn them out, they vote. And then you put out of your 40%, out of your 35%, maybe you got 60, 70% turnout. You put that with other people who are voting for your candidate and you win the election. It's an opportunity. Nobody asking, because even if you had 60% black, it's not guaranteeing the black candidate's going to win. What's the turnout? What's the breakdown within the racial group? You're making an assumption. That second prong of the 3-prong Gingles test said the plaintiffs must show the minority group is politically cohesive, which you can make that demonstration, not by 100% threshold, but you can kind of see most of these people do vote a similar way. And then third and finally, the plaintiff must show that under the totality of the circumstances, as all these factors we're talking about and many more, the political process is not equally open to minority voters. And that's what they're after right now in Louisiana. Right after the Alabama case, which Jeanette Nelson kept referring back to. Y'all just decided this. They're back because they think they can get over and they think you may be more susceptible to it now. And in between that Alabama case and Louisiana case, there was an election. Yeah, she didn't say none of this. I'm saying this. You know, they weren't trying to cement a white government, a minority white rule, a Rhodesia in the United States. What did Larry call it the other day? White Manistan or something. You know what I'm saying? It's what you're trying to do. It's clear. It's very clear. And it would be clear to anyone who is being honest. But we know that Beer Kavanaugh is dishonest, and Justice McConnell Gorsuch sitting in his stolen seat. Because if you look at the dissents to that case, it's a 5-4 case, and John Roberts was on the side of the angels that time. This time, not so much. I expect them to try to eviscerate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act this time. And I don't know that this decision won't come down earlier in the year because they're trying to steal a whole bunch more seats before their Lord and Master has to face the Democratic House of Representatives and his agenda grinds to a halt. As the MAGA Muppet said a couple of weeks ago, if the Democrats win the House, then Trump's a 2-year president. Yeah, that's right. All the reckoning he's done in the first 9 months giving birth to this devil agenda would be ground to a halt if they win. So they got to rush this thing. I expect the Supreme Court to be writing right now. They probably already wrote it. But at any rate, if you look at the dissents in the Alabama case, the Milligan case, which, by the way, the maps that were used resulted in Terry Sewell out of Selma, kind of based, but that black belt in Alabama being no longer by herself in the federal legislature. She was joined by Shamari Figures. That's where Shamari Figures came from. Now, if they get their way in Louisiana and the court backs them on this in Section 2, Figures and Sewell probably out. Alabama goes blood red. And then stupid people watching stupid television would say red state instead of extreme gerrymandered state. Alabama's not red. Louisiana's not red. It's underorganized, as Gary Chambers often says. But in that dissent in the Alabama case, you saw Beer Kavanaugh join the majority opinion. He was part of the 5-4. But what he was doing, I think, and what a lot of people think in terms of people who are reading this and thinking about this and talking about this, he was putting the poison pill in, anticipating Louisiana or whatever was going to come down the pike. He joined the opinion except for a discussion he writes about in that Milligan case of the difference between race consciousness and race predominance. He talked a lot about that at oral arguments. Will you just wait? Well, actually, hold on for a minute. Let me get my robe up. Oh, yeah. Race consciousness. What you doing, man? I'm trying to figure out a point of entry to make a case of colorblindness. This is what Derek Bell and them call colorblind constitutionalism. You're making assumptions about black people. And ultimately, could I have a beer? Thank you. Ultimately, you're assuming that these people will not, engage in the political process. No, what you're trying to mask is you're trying to create standing for whiteness because Louisiana is a third black. And if you could wipe out not just Cleo Fields, but Troy Carter and everybody, whoever, woman or man would be in those seats. Imagine Louisiana with 30%, a third of the people are black, and there are no black people in the federal legislature. Kavanaugh's response might be, well, are you conflating a sense of predominance with a sense of consciousness just because they're white or just because they're black? You don't know how they will vote. Yeah, you should probably look at the data, which is what Janai Nelson is saying. Y'all go back and look at the data. You're severely underprepared to make any of these arguments. Clarence Thomas filed a dissent. Of course he did. And, Lord and Master requires it. And Gorsuch joined him in the dissent in full. Amy Coney Barrett and Alito joined in part. Thomas argued that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act doesn't require Alabama to redraw its congressional districts, and this is the Alabama case, so that black voters can control the number of seats proportional to black voters in its population. Okay. Yeah. But you looking at a demographic argument, Clarence, anyway, you don't care whether black people have any political representation or not. Your lords and masters are, after all, not black. Are they, CT? Harlan Crow with his copy of Mein Kampf in his house. One that gave you that mobile home or gave you the loan that you ain't got to pay back. You know who we're talking about, my friend. The Christian soldier, Alito, also dissented. Gorsuch joined him in full, arguing that the majority's understanding of that Gingles test, that 3-part test, specifically its understanding of that phrase reasonably configured in the first part. Is this district reasonably configured? Does it look kind of contiguous? Is it all of the same geographical piece? Or if it's not, does it connect something that makes sense politically, that makes sense, in terms of the race and culture, the background? Or did you draw something that looks so incredibly extreme that it's clear that you had another purpose in mind, even though intent is not required now, thanks to the 1982 amendment in the Voting Rights Act? You don't have to show intent. You can just look at the data and see and make some assumptions about what you see. It's a very important point. But Alito dissented in the Alabama case. He says this reasonably configured phrase, you're using it wrong. It's flawed. And if you use the correct understanding, it will lead to different results. What's the correct understanding? Sam, maybe you want to think it over with your wife while y'all got them fascist flags flying in front of your house. I mean, what's the correct understanding, Sam? Again, judge made law. Elections don't matter. Yeah, the judges matter. What we heard at the beginning of our session today was intellectual warfare, as Jacob Carruthers would call it. It's very fascinating to me. People say elections don't matter, all this kind of thing. But let's think about this in this larger context, because the No Kings thing is here around the country. People coming in tonight saw so many police in the city of Washington, D.C. last night. I'm like, where are these police coming from? And you realize, oh, they may be here patrolling because of No Kings. Well, guess what? No Kings ain't centered in the capital of the empire. It's really spread out across the provinces, to use the Hunger Games metaphor. So this week, we're thinking about cultural meaning making and movement and memory as antidotes. Thinking about how we make meaning, how we grapple with culture and memory, how we do our reading and writing work, our study work, how we be in this question of deep thinking. These are antidotes to the fast spreading poisons of disinformation and white nationalist distortion, which are threatening African progress everywhere, threatening human progress in terms of our broader society. I was thinking a lot about this week because this week marked several important birthdays. Well, everybody's birthday, whose birthday is this week, is important. So happy birthday to everyone. I'm thinking about figures that are often used to kind of let us think collectively. One of which is a brother who we don't talk about a lot, who you heard us talk about here, but I'm going to mention him in a little bit later, George Washington Williams. And I'll show you a program, which will also serve as a marker and a reminder for me to come back to it. Was it a program on Thursday? Thursday, the 16th of October, was the birthday of George Washington Williams. This is George Washington Williams, politician, soldier, activist. Was at Howard University's Founders Library. Shout out to the good brother, Frank Smith. Frank Smith is the man. Frank Smith, my brother, elder, the founding director of the African American Civil War Museum. That museum will open during the first part of November, around Veterans Day. It is not subject to the whims and vagaries of that nasty piece of work, Russell Vogt, who right now is running the federal government through his signing pen, the addled, sundowning, clearly Donald John Trump. So it will be open. And one of the central figures in Frank and his team's team, I keep using this, I want to use the sports metaphor. Frank and his collective and his family and his communities advocating for the deepening of memory of African people in our struggles for freedom and democracy, and what he would call freedom and democracy, what I would call governance in this state. And everyone who has helped and everybody who's been allies is George Washington Williams. We'll come back to that. His birthday was this week. Also the great, of course, Lerone Bennett Jr. My man, Lerone Bennett Jr. His birthday this week. And also Kerry James Marshall, the artist. And in thinking about all of those three as memory keepers in Bennett's case, and the other two as well, but cultural meaning makers, certainly in terms of Kerry James Marshall, maybe George Washington Williams, who was a historian, a politician, the first Black elected official in the legislature in Ohio. He traveled through Africa. He wrote the first critique of the Belgians and the Belgian Congo to be published. This is like 15, 16 years before Mark Twain's Red Record is Ida B. Wells. Red Rubber, was that the name of Mark Twain's piece? King Leopold's Soliloquy was the name. King Leopold's Soliloquy, that was Mark Twain. But 15 to 16 years before that, George Washington Williams wrote a long letter. He had traveled to Congo, and he's buried in England. But Williams only lived to be 42 years old, 41, 42 years old. But during that time was a soldier in the Civil War, joined at age 14, lied about his age so he could get a gun to help end our captivity and human trafficking. Just an incredible figure. In 1887, he wrote a 2-volume work called A History of the Negro Race in Africa and America. I'm looking over there at it, but I'm not going to get up and get it. I might have my copy of, I doubt it. I'm not going to look for it because I remember putting it somewhere else. Men of Mark, 1887. His biography is there. The first biography of his, written by his friend, William J. Simmons. And then many years later, John Hope Franklin, I think 1985, I think it was, published the kind of fleshed out biography of George Washington Williams. But he and Lerone Bennett Jr. might be called in social structure renderings historians, but in governance formations, we would refer to them probably more accurately as memory keepers, cultural meaning makers, practitioners of movement and memory. How did or do we remember things? And, we talked about him at this celebration, thanks to Frank Smith and the Civil War Museum. So, and thinking about Kerry James Marshall, and by the way, we were saying just before we went live, I was showing Prof 2 new catalogs that have come out. There's an exhibit in London. No, actually, no, not London. I got this from there. Yeah.
As you're showing us, and you've done this before, I would love for you to explain to us why those catalogs are important and how you engage with them.
Oh yeah, thank you, Prof. Yeah, well, because cultural meaning making, everybody can't get to the art gallery, and everything's not going to be on websites. And one of the reasons I love how Kerry James Marshall talks about this, the major retrospective on his work to date that was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a couple of years ago called Mastery. We've talked about that before. If you go in the archive, you'll see an extensive conversation. I show y'all the catalog from that. It's so funny it was the Charles White retrospective when I was sitting in the foyer trying to negotiate to get a full set of the African Arts magazine. See, this is the other way. A lot of times when I go places too, they serve as markers for you to remember the other things I'm doing. I was on the phone with somebody and I got a good price to get all the copies of African Arts, which was the major, still kind of remains the major magazine which collected discussions and articles and photographs and retrospectives on African art. So, but I was sitting in the foyer at the Met Brewer for the Charles White exhibit. And we'll come back to Charles White in a minute. But the reason that these catalogs are important, because everybody can't go. See, being on the East Coast, I can, get on the mega bus or drive or get on the train or do something cheap and get to a place and go into place and be in the place and sit there. And interesting enough, think about silence. I almost always go along to be silent. You got to be quiet when you kind of thinking about things. And then you want to see things in relation to other things. You want to see the object and the things that you do. When you do that, then the challenge becomes to communicate those things and help bring those things together. Because when you see the little statue of Queen T from the New Kingdom in Kemet in the collection of the Met, and there's a new exhibit by the Met, another Egyptian exhibit. We've talked about that. We talked about it in the office hours. When you see it there, and then you go to the Grand Egyptian Museum or the Louvre in Paris or the Nubian Museum in Aswan, and you see T, the common denominator at that point is you. I saw all them places, different places, and I'm making the connections. Then I'm putting them in conversation in my mind with everything else is there. Now, people can't do that, or don't have the opportunity yet. They haven't taken the opportunity yet to do that, either unable or unwilling or just whatever. You get the catalogs. You can look at them at your house. Hold on, let me get the other one. Oh man, I'm seeing it. So you can't replicate being in the physical place, but you can approximate it in a way that continues to stimulate your thinking. Now, that's the main reason that I get the catalogs. Plus, they put together scholars who are writing about the work, the people themselves, the artists. And so they're history books as well. And the images are another form of inscription. Now, this one, which I saved until this morning because I just got it yesterday. This exhibit ain't in the United States. This exhibit is going to several places, but the Royal Academy of Arts, the Kunsthaus Zurich, Germany, and the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris in Paris, in France. I ain't gonna need none of them places no time soon. I don't know. I don't think. But I got the catalog. Says right now, in fact, it ain't open yet any of these places. Royal Academy of Arts, London, 20th September to the 18th of January, 26. All right, odds. All right, I told you, I got to go. The Kunsthaus Zurich, 27th of February to the 16th of August, 2026. And the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris, 18th September, 2026. Almost a year from now to 24th January, 2027. But on October the 18th, the first time we're going live here in the stream, and anybody watching this after this, here go what's going to be in the exhibit. This is called The Histories by Kerry James Marshall. So I'm reading, I forget what paper I was reading. I don't know, one of them art magazines, could have been the Times or the Financial Times. So there's an exhibit coming out. What exhibit? So immediately I go looking for the catalog. That's kind of also another reason. It's an insurance policy in case I don't get to see it. Here's a footnote. Once art exhibition catalogs are published, they almost always go out of print. They don't republish a lot of art exhibition catalogs. So you collect art exhibition catalogs when you can, because you might not see it again. And the older, the more difficult it is. And sometimes you got to go to the place and go to the museum shop because they don't put them online. They don't put you go. So the little catalogs from the little small exhibits, maybe it's 10 pieces or 8 pieces or 25 pieces or 3 pieces. And then somebody writes an essay. It might only be available at that place. You go to a little museum, spend $5, $10, get the little pamphlet, and that's the only place you're going to see it. So yeah, I spent a lot of time collecting those catalogs because in them are the inscriptions, in them are the artists. And so it's interesting. It's so interesting. Look, so I'm opening this with y'all. I was showing Karen the binding, which I thought was fascinating. See, you open it and then it comes out too a little bit like this. I'm like, oh, look at that. They got this is very interesting little book culture. So I'm looking, Kerry James Marshall, the histories. The first piece you see is a piece where he is giving comment in the mastery exhibit where he says, this is a paint by numbers. This is a sister painting by numbers. Well, no, actually, this isn't the paint by. Yes, it is. It is paint by numbers. Look behind her. You see the numbers? He said there was this thing back when back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s and 80s, where you could get a portrait with just the numbers in it, mix your paints, and you could replicate the thing you see. So Marshall is making a comment on how you mass produce art. But look at the sister who's doing the painting. He's always painting in black. Various shades of black. If this was a better camera, you could see the different shades of black, even in her pit. And look at her colorful outfit. Well, what he's saying is she's going to disrupt the paint by numbers. But the first Kerry James Marshall I ever saw, it's interesting. I'm looking at it now. Here's the next page, table of contents. You got some commentary. You got an interview with him at the beginning, radical pragmatism, Kerry James Marshall, the history's name. Then you turn the page. The next second piece you see, a close-up of a part of his great America. They're going into an amusement park called America. These are captive Africans. Wow. Wow. This is one of his most famous. In fact, I haven't gone through the exhibit. Let me see. I'm sure he's got the whole thing there. But that was one of the first. Oh wait, oh my God. This is in all the retrospectives. This is actually the first Kerry James Marshall I stopped in shock at. I'll tell you this story quickly, 843, because there's major things we haven't gotten to today, and I want to get to this. But let me see, can I tell this in about 2 minutes? If you read Ralph Ellison's essay, The Little Man at Chirac Station, he gives, he went to Tuskegee for school. He was a musician, trumpet player. And he talked about how his trumpet teacher, his sister, reminded him, his music teacher, sister reminded him, always practice as if you're in front of the little man at Chirac Station, even if there's nobody there. What does that mean? That means aspire to your best standard. Push yourself, exceed. Why? Because you get off the little train that takes you to Tuskegee, and there's a little man sitting there. You don't know who that man is. That man might be the master musician. Pretend like whoever you're playing for, or whoever, even if there's nobody there, you're imagining playing for, that they are the experts. And then he uses the essay to talk about how you find expertise everywhere. I connected to the book of Ptah. Good speech is found everywhere. The ancient Egyptians saying, you can find those. See those sisters over here pounding the seeds, the grain into wheat, into the bread, so they're gonna make the bread. They could be the wisest people here, but don't pass them just because you think they pounding grain. So Ellison talks about the brothers who moved the furniture at the Opera House, the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, and how they know more about opera than damn near everybody because they done seen everything every time. They got to move all the sets. So when they start talking, you better listen to them. He's given a set of a standard. Well, I'm thinking about that because when I went the first time I saw Kerry James Marshall, exhibit, he was at the National Gallery of Art. Now here, this now closed, thanks to Bozo and his friends, for temporarily. Again, we're thinking about everybody who's been laid off, people who may have now looking for other jobs. We know that's why No Kings is important. We got to show these people a show of force. Do you understand? As part, not the only thing, but part of the strategy to wrest this control of the state away from them. So, oh, yes. You back?
No.
Hey, I thought you was back. Okay, cool. No, I didn't know. But in the process of going to the I used to go down. I go down there all the time. So I was down there one time, and the brothers who were checking bags was like, "Hey man, you gotta go upstairs and see this dude Kerry James Marshall's work." I said, "I didn't know who Kerry James Marshall was." I'm embarrassed to say, this was maybe 7-8 years ago, maybe longer. And at my big age at that time, not to know that's a hole in my. So yeah, the brothers and sisters who work at the museums, they be knowing. They be knowing. So hey, man, cool, you got you. So I got upstairs. First thing I saw. This is Kerry James Marshall, Nat Turner, with the head of his master. I said, "Oh, wait, what? Who is this dude?" So now I go around the corner, and I see the big palettes, the big ones. I mean, I wish I could find it. I'm not going to be able to. Let me see, because I don't know this. This actually is a piece that is in the permanent collection of the National Portrait Gallery. This is his piece, SOB, from 2003. The sister is sitting in front of a bookshelf full of African books, and she's thinking, SOB. SOB. Is it sob, like I'm crying because I didn't know this, or son of a bitch? You see her right there with this book, Africa Before 1500. That's the name of the book. This is SOB. It is at the Smithsonian, not the National Portrait Gallery, the Smithsonian American Art Museum. They're together. Portrait Gallery, American Art Museum. Both closed right now. This one's on display right now. When it reopens, you can go down there and see it if you haven't seen it before. But anyway, I wish I could find. I'll probably see School of Beauty, School of Culture before I see anything else. But oh yeah, wait. Oh no. I saw Great America. There it is. Great America, 1994. This the whole piece. They're coming across the Atlantic, going into this crazy ass. This ain't even the whole thing. Wow, and it's huge. You see this big tapestry. It takes up most of a wall when you see it out. And so I go upstairs when they call the Tower at the National Gallery of Art. It's like an honor to be presented in the Tower. Kerry James Marshall, the first Black living artist to present in the Tower.
I do have a question. The wow, is that part of his theme?
You see wow a lot of places in his art, don't you?
Okay.
Wow. But even in Great America, yeah, and see, Prof, this is the beauty of the art. It's up to us. It's almost like, in fact, Kerry James Marshall makes this point. I was showing my students the other day, because in this Black Aesthetics class, we talk about art and music. And so I showed them a bit of an interview with Kerry James Marshall. And one of the things he says, I have a fairly detached relationship with my art. In other words, it's not an act of expression for me. It's like a political act. My project isn't just getting things out of my head. No, that's not really it. He said, I have a fairly detached approach. Part of the thing, and I've heard him say this many times, part of his work, he says, is to get me, and through me, us, into the museums. So when you take your child up there, she's gonna see herself too. He makes this point. He says, I don't have any problem with Rubens and the rest of them painting fleshy white women in the 16th century, 15th century. That's not a problem. That's what they were interested in. That's what it's done. He said, I can't argue with the past. What's done is done. That's been done. Fine. He says, now, today, right now, if I'm painting fleshy white women, because I got a problem. So we gotta get in the game. This is a great, if y'all can find it on YouTube, I know you can. There's a great conversation between him and the good brother Bill Rhoden, sports writer, used to be for the Times. They're talking about the question of competition in sports and in art as sports. And so what you see is Marshall putting this forward. This is why we have to do our work at the highest level, not to prove anything to anybody, but to project ourselves into the future. It's very important. Speaking of which, this is the other catalog that just came out. I got this a couple of weeks ago. This is he was pioneering dealing with the question of even comic books. I've been waiting on this one for a long time. This is the most comprehensive look at Kerry James Marshall as he dealt with comic books. It's called Rhythm Master. This is how it begins. And so he says at the beginning, and you can see like his panels where he's doing this kind of, he got these imaginary characters, these Black characters he's doing comics with. I've seen a few of these panels. There was a couple of them on display. I want to say Jack Whitten gallery in Manhattan. But anyway, years ago. But This is what he says at the beginning. He says, let me see if I can find it. He says the superhero-centered comic book is a very popular art form that has rarely featured Black characters in the lead role, yet more invisibility. And of the few Black characters that have appeared, none of them is the product of a Black artistic imagination, and none has achieved the status of a Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, or the Fantastic Four. This is him writing early. And I said, this is before we talking about the comics that we think about today and the way that we think about them. He says, so that presents yet another challenge. Without a paradigmatic hero figure and no heroic fantasies to speak of that can be transmitted over generations, movement, and memory. Come on, y'all. This is the Africana Studies framework. He says that can be transmitted over generations. Think of the heroic figures. Let's just very quickly, give me 30 seconds. Imagine LeBron James, imagine Serena Williams. Now go back and imagine Althea Gibson, imagine Jack Roosevelt Robinson. Now go back and imagine Fritz Pollard. And now go back and imagine Moses Fleetwood. Now go back and imagine Octavius Catto as a baseball player. Now go back and imagine all those great Black athletes who were part of rites of passage in the continent of Africa before we were trafficked. Now go back and go to the ancient Egyptians and them playing sports on the walls. You understand? It hasn't been transmitted over generations, because I guarantee you there are people in right here now. So who's Fritz Pollard? Who's Moses Fleetwood? Octavius Catto? Wait, I thought he was a politician. Yeah, he was also a master baseball player in the 19th century. In other words, think about, so when he says without a paradigmatic hero figure and no heroic fantasies to speak of, I'm sorry, I thought I said Serena Williams. Let's go back. I said, of course, Althea Gibson. Yes, but what about Lucy Diggs Slow? Who is that? Exactly. Go look her up. Women's tennis champion before she became the first dean of women at Howard University. Without a paradigmatic hero figure and no heroic fantasies to speak of that can be transmitted over generations, Black youth are as trapped as Black adults are in an image world that privileges white persons as both heroic ideals and ideals of beauty. That colorblind world that Brett Kavanaugh wants so he can preserve his nasty beer drinking whiteness. You don't know how they're going to vote. We kind of know. Tony Nelson said, do your homework. Ketanji Brown Jackson, it says the thing replicates itself from generation to generation to generation, and you don't have to go back there. You can just draw them. They keep drawing the same map. Are you listening? Come on, Beard. Beard said, I ain't got to listen. I can count. And we got the upper hand, so we're going to make some ish up. Keep you Negroes in servitude. Finally, Kerry James Marshall said, as Black adults are in an image world that privileges white persons as both heroic ideals and ideals of beauty, so I developed the Rhythm Master comic project starting in 1999 because there was just too little out there featuring Black people at the center of it all. Y'all can freeze if you want to pause later and look. There's the quote. Kerry James Marshall. That's what he says at the beginning there. And let me see, footnote number 2. Let me give you the footnote for it, which I assume will be in the back because I have, no. Actually, no, it's not in the back. This is at the beginning because it's the beginning of the essay. I just picked this up. This is in a piece. Oh, I got this book in the other room. It's this other thing. I strive for comprehensiveness. I strive for the moment when everything is up and somewhere. I ain't got to go to nobody else's library. Just walk into mine. This is an argument for, of course, this is an argument for something else. Kerry James Marshall in conversation with Dieter Rostrate, which is in the edited volume, another exhibition catalog by Nav Haq entitled Kerry James Marshall, Painting and Other Stuff, Brussels, London, 2013. Painting and other stuff. It may not be in this room. I keep a lot of my Kerry James Marshall right here next to the next brother we're going to talk about, Charles White, but we've talked about him many times, so we'll come to that in a minute. Thinking about that, thinking about Lerone Bennett, who we've talked about many times out of Clarksdale, Mississippi, thinking about George Williams, who we'll come back to. All of them are memory keepers, all of them in many ways cultural meaning makers, but they converge in a common denominator. At least Marshall and Bennett do, and that's Charles Wilbert White, who we won't talk about again today. Y'all can look at the sessions we've done in class on Charles White, the great artist. I think I do have his major retrospective book in here. Yep. Here we go. This is the one I went to, Charles White retrospective. Y'all know Charles White's work. This is the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. That's where I was, and Yale published this. Another exhibition catalog. This is one of, oh man, it's one of Charles White stuff is unmistakable. It's kind of like John Biggers out of Texas. So you see him here. He and Elizabeth Catlett were partners. He was married to her for a while. He loved drawing Black women. Boy, I tell you what, we will actually be on the eastern shore of Maryland this weekend for Harriet Tubman at Harriet Tubman's place. Shout out to Dr. Stephanie Tisdale, who's here in Nubia with us and doing all this work. We'll be there going through the Harriet Tubman Trail National Park Service, even though it's closed, that's outside. So thank goodness for the Mid-Atlantic region of ASCAC's regional conference. Look at these. I mean, he's working in very simple materials, but doing it, man, if I could find, hold on, give me a second. I might be able to find it. Yep. General Moses. This is from 1965. The year we came back around here. That's his Harriet Tubman. But Charles White inspired Kerry James Marshall, who saw his work in a collection, a history book. Remember I told you about Russell Adams, Great Negroes Past and Present. Kerry James Marshall out of Birmingham, Alabama, family moved to LA. He saw Charles White's work in a history book, was so inspired that he went looking for White after he began to get his own chops together through schooling, and he became a junior protege of Charles White. So Kerry James Marshall in many ways is him extending White, who's part of this larger project, a genealogy, connecting that. Charles White also illustrated some of Lerone Bennett Jr.'s work. And we've talked about that. So you see Lerone Bennett Jr. writing the history and Charles White giving the pictures. Again, cultural meaning makers who are bringing this forward. When we start talking about book banning and we start talking about they're trying to erase our history, all true in a social structure formation, but what you going to do about it? The first thing you need to do is be still, be silent, and out of that silence, open your eyes and go looking for yourself. And as you remember, you will realize they don't even know where to look for the books to ban. These are stupid people. I grew with my friend and colleague Bettina Love when we were down at Morehouse about a month ago with Nina Gilbert, and we were on that panel discussing some of these things. And one of the things that she says, you walk into a room full of these people and you realize two things. Number one, they're stupid. And number two, I have shrunk myself to their level of stupidity because I've mistaken their praise for the barometer of how I've achieved. So you go in the room, kiki, and you start thinking, I'm smart because they said I'm smart. Then you leave and realize they stupid and I'm dumb for actually thinking that how they look at me is how I should look at myself. You want to ban a book? Find them to ban first. You don't even know where to look for them. You clowns. But at any rate, not even important at this point. But they converge in like Charles White is a common denominator between Lerone Bennett and Kerry James Marshall, whose birthdays were a couple of days ago. The lesson of their lives and their work as examples is clear. Cultural meaning making and movement in memory is essential to shaping collective action on this No Kings weekend as we think about it. Our work must not just be reactionary, though. The good sister Isosa Osa and her crew at Onyx Impact, kind of this think tank that has developed data collection tank, think about Black Futures Lab. We're talking this week, Lamont and I were talking with, Tammy Sawyer was in town. We were talking with the good brother Didrik Sante Muhammad, who is the leader of the Joint Center for Political Studies here in DC. They could build themselves the oldest Black think tank. But talking about how we have to collect data, we have to do this research, we have to make these formations, and he's absolutely right about all of that. But Onyx Impact is one of those kind of think tanks that has emerged. The young, like I said, good sister Isosa Osa, they've just produced a new report called the Blackout Report. The Blackout Report, the real world cost of erasing, distorting, and suppressing Black progress. You can look it up, ONYX, the Onyx Impact. And we've had her on Sirius before, and I'm sure she'll be back soon in short order, probably next week, to talk about this. But she said there are 3 action steps, because what the report is trying to enumerate all the places that African people have been erased, attempts to erase us, distort us, or suppress Black progress in the data, in the textbooks, in the schools, in the protests, in the book banning, all that stuff, trying to get it in one place, and then trying to create a process where if you experience that, you can let them know. In fact, there are 3 action steps they suggest. One, they're saying to raise public awareness about what is taking place. That's important. In fact, Sosa also was on Roland Martin the other night. I filled in for a panelist on the Friday night. So that if y'all watching later, this is Friday the 17th of October. And we were in conversation with her about this work. So I said, this is part of raising public awareness. What we're doing right now. Now that y'all know it's there, download it, get it. Number 2, encourage people, she says Americans, I would say people, to identify and report ongoing efforts to eliminate Black representation. So keep reporting. They got a reporting portal. And then the third one was to push for accountability standards for journalists and academics to treat claims of equity-based harm as audit triggers. So you looking at it, said something feels wrong. Let me check these facts. Let me look at the continuity of what's being discussed. Let me look at the consequences. Verify every data set, particularly the ones they tried to erase and now they want to so-called restore. And we'll talk about this in a minute, because when they got rid of the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, and replaced her first with this political hack, one of Trump's lawyers, the same one he sent to talk to Ghislaine Maxwell, that same guy became the interim Librarian of Congress. But the staff at the LOC has continued to work really under the kind of direction of the deputy to Dr. Hayden. My thing is, she should have sued, but I understand at some point, you can't just be the tip of the spear forever. But I'm raising it because the Library of Congress is in charge of the Office of Copyright. And remember when we talked about this first, when they got rid of her illegally, by the way, Librarian of Congress, not the Librarian of the White House, not the Librarian of the Executive, but that nasty piece of work Russell Vogt with this expansive concept of Article 2 of the Federal Constitution and being suborned by the courts, at least the Supreme Court, the other judges, the district courts and the circuit court seem to be fomenting a full rebellion against these 9, at least the 6 white nationalists, 5 1/4, maybe a half white nationalists. But the point I'm trying to make right here is just very simple. It's a simple one, that perhaps they're trying to get their hands on the copyright stuff and the data. Maybe they want to manipulate it again. AI, all that stuff, AI is trained on large language models, trained on data. So we over the Library of Congress, maybe we can get a way to dump all that stuff into the AI and of course enhance the stock portfolio as this rising AI bubble, which is going to bust and wash over all of us right now, continues its greedy expansion. All of this, it ain't just getting rid of a Black woman. That's a bonus, but we got to get our hands on that data. And they all got the copyright officer. Everybody got a copyright and got patents. Maybe we can get our hands on that, particularly if they let us go rogue. So Osa and her crew at Onyx Impact says the third thing you can do is to push for accountability standards. And when you see them say, okay, we're going to restore the data. Did you? Let's match it with our own data sets. Let's look at our own stuff. Publish side-by-side comparison images. Link the archives and copy. Make explicit the link between lost data and the real-world effects like slashed budgets or reduced staffing. When you say, well, we don't have any data here to show that Black people, well, we've generated some data and look at the impact. To tie that to the voting rights case, again, what they're arguing over part is the representation. And then what at the end, you heard Attorney Nelson say, I don't think Counsel has developed a robust, she didn't use this language, but then I could go back and read the transcript. But, you haven't done your homework. Do you actually know on the ground what is going on? So she wants the courts perhaps to return this to the lower courts to do that homework. Again, this is intellectual warfare. That's why you got to pay attention to detail. It can't all just be bravado and blah, 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 blah. No, have you done the deep work? And so what they're saying is, as they try to wage war to erase us, we got to replace that data with data that we generate. And we should hold things like commercial news, media, entertainment, stuff like the New York Times to a higher standard. That's a nice wish, which is why the question I asked her last night was, what role should and has Black institutions played in this? Because when we talk about they're erasing our history. Yeah, if you look at the segregated schools, we did Negro History Week. We did Black History all year round. When you look at the after school programs, when you look at the community centers, when you look at the work, in Nubia, how many times have we had that conversation on Monday nights and office hours? People have come in and given us examples of North Carolina or Florida or Alabama, New York, places where people of California, people Bay Area, people of Texas, people are talking about Nigeria. People are talking about places where that work has been done and is being done. And we did do it. You should know on Charles White. That's right. Thank you, Prof. You actually go, if you're in the Nubia archive, the narrative archive, you can see that you should know on Charles White. Absolutely. The work is being done. It needs to be done more to scale. And of course, it's also agreed. She said, yeah, we absolutely have to remember that. We have to focus on that. And we have to align that with what we're doing. I think for me, that's where I'm focused. No kings, absolutely. We got to do that. We can do many things at once. We have to do many things at once. My focus is on building autonomous, freestanding maroon. Some people call them maroon, but I would say self-determining Black spaces, including places to do that intellectual work. This is the governance lesson. Our work must flood our spaces and then overflow our spaces. Our governance formations do that. We do that with by doing what we're doing week after week, month after month, year after year. We do that with information and narrative, the way that we are doing it and the way that they're doing it on Onyx Impact and a million other places we have to do that. Look, for example, we're talking this week with a sister who works with the Hurston Wright Foundation, founded by Clyde McElveen and Marita Golden. And we talked with Nichelle Hayes, my friend Nichelle Hayes, who one time was over the Indianapolis Public Library, continues to work with the Hurston Wright Foundation, at one time led the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Just a good sister. Brilliant, just beautiful spirit, African-centered, 10 toes down for our common humanity through her lens as an African. Last night, Friday the 17th, the Hurston Wright Foundation had its annual awards ceremony where they give awards to people who are voted as doing the best nonfiction, the best poetry, the best fiction. Of course, James Percival Everett was one of the nominees for best fiction that we talked about earlier this year. And also in the process, they support young writers, college writers, high school writers. They do writing workshops, and Rita Golden has done a lot of that work in particular. So talking with Nichelle yesterday on Sirius, she talked about the importance of literacy and talking about, doing that. And that contributes to cultural meaning making and movement and memory. And at the end of the interview, we talked a little bit about that attack on Carla Hayden, and she brought that up about copyright. So acting proactively, supporting those institutions that support us, that these out of our governance formation, who we are to each other, is in many ways an antidote to that poison of disinformation and chaos. It doesn't mean that we don't attack the entire fascist project, because they're doing it with our money, our tax money. They want to do more. So it doesn't mean that we don't do a 10 toes down full attack on that, but it does mean that the place we're attacking from is not a place of weakness, but it's a place of self-determining strength. We're going to do what we're going to do for ourselves anyway. In many ways, stopping the erasure of Africana, the attempted erasure of Africana, is for non-African people, and also for those African people who have not yet connected to those spaces that we control. So that's governance talk in a social structure formation that is quite challenging now. What is the lesson from this social structure as we kind of think about this in terms of our Africana studies framework? We got to pull back from this abyss. Analyze and critique the U.S. and global social structures without collapsing under the weight of the disinformation, the deception, and this steady barrage of chaos, energy, noise, and bullshit. Man, Mike Johnson just straight lying. Junior Varsity Vance with his eyeliner running, talking about those young Republicans were just kidding. They're just kids. Brett Kavanaugh reaching on his judicial robe and saying, well, Voting Rights Act, yeah, it was important, but at what point does it end? Some point it's got to end. I mean, y'all just talking. There will be times when we have to engage you in intellectual warfare, and we will triumph very quickly because you're very weak and stupid. And our numbers will break your political backs like the sea, but that cannot be the reason for our existence. The pieces of the U.S. project are ill-fitting. Some of them are worm-eaten. Some of them were never made of good cloth. Some of them were never designed to be anything other than a fig leaf to cover the naked white supremacy that they were born from. Some are unsavable as patches. But what happens, to go back to Dr. Nubia Kai, who I saw at the George Washington Williams celebration on Thursday, and who was ecstatic because copies of her book are flying off the shelves and people are really focusing on the message that she has distilled in many years of scholarship. And thought I had, here it is right here. It's a brilliant little book. And then that can lead you to her other work. She's a poet and a novelist, A River of Prophecy. Again, we talked about that last week. And good looking narrative team for making that short, because I love how we're building out, and the folks who are tech savvy are building out now, even on this space and on the YouTube side, and then other spaces, to chop some of these moments in our weekly conversation into these little digestible 2-minute bits or 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'm loving it. Y'all do that, because y'all know this is the thing we have to do. So, but at any rate, as Nubia says at the end of that book, we got to learn how to sew. See, America is a patchwork quilt, but some of them pieces is rotten. And some of the thread y'all trying to sew with is rotten. So learning how to sew means learning how to put those things together, but you got to use the materials that allow us to do it. This No King's energy of Indivisible and all these other affiliated groups and the other formations and the nearly 3,000 different places that are saying they're going to do something over the arc of the next 24 hours. That is what the servants of the old ways are terrified of. That's what MAGA Mike is terrified of. That's why they call it Hate America, because their vision is a rotten vision. Their thread is gossamer thread. It's a weak thread, and they see that people are learning how to sew and then stitching together a new garment with other pieces, with pieces much older than that BS they trying to go, and they're terrified, and they should be terrified. All they would have to do to not be terrified is to drop their whiteness, drop that investment. But they can't do it because it's the thing they cling to like a child. I mean, this is the problem. They're nasty pieces of work. Think about the kinds. We're going to talk about pieces of work in a minute, even as a phrase. Because y'all hear me say that a lot. Nasty pieces of work, nasty pieces of work. What is a piece of work? You ever heard people who are really into sewing, millinery, people who they call it piecework? I do piecework. People, yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. But let me finish up this metaphor of sewing in patches. You know, there are people who want to be weavers who haven't mastered the craft of sewing and mistake themselves for being more than they are because they hang out with stupid people, particularly white supremacists. Watch those Negroes who white supremacists praise. Because as dumb as they are, you got Negroes who think they're intelligent because these people have told them they're smart. And these people think somehow that they can get in a room and weave something different. They haven't learned how to sew. And if they did know how to sew, they're using the wrong thread. And the pieces they're trying to patch together are weak. I'll leave that so that people who can hear what I'm saying. But when you put together pieces, you're building a project. One of the things that Kerry James Marshall does, which kind of gestures in some ways toward people like Ramari Bearden and other, Marshall's not a collage maker, but he puts a lot of different images together and he makes you think. Ramari Bearden is a collage master. He's putting all kind of things together to make you think. People love collage. I do too. It makes you think. It's busy. It makes you think. I say busy. Busy is the wrong word. It's a form of Africana cultural meaning making in many ways. It's polyrhythmic, polycentered, to use that phrase maybe from Africana cultural meaning making. But that having been said, when we think about putting things together, there are two different ways I want us to think about it just for a minute here. One is assembling something that's never been done before to represent something you're thinking or something we're building together or something you're observing and people putting together that patchwork, putting together that quilting, collaging, you see, and then you sit back and see the difference and the similarities, the rhythms start to appear. Then there's the work of trying to experience the thing as it exists outside of us and communicate that sense to other people. Think of it as a map. Okay. Ketanji Brown Jackson saying that I'm using language. She's not using this language, but I'm meaning the same thing. From captivity to apartheid to now, these people in these same places, you keep drawing the same map, but now you want to be freed from drawing a map that will somehow diminish your capacity to reign control over these people. I'm going beyond what she said, but I know where she was going. And I know Kavanaugh knew too. And I know Clarence knows too. And I know Alito and Comey Barrett and John Roberts and Gorsuch know too. That is an attempt to narrate reality, narrate the thing as it is. But there's always a distance between the thing as it is and the thing we perceive. This is Howard Thurman talking about God. The distance between what created everything that exists and where we are right now is our capacity to perceive it. Thinking about footnote today, this is a section of the Weekly Financial Times that I only read to get a kick out of. It's called How to Spend It Wisely. They put this glossy, this is for the super rich people. So I just laugh about it and think about, look at all this stuff people wasted money on. But, it's money to waste because that's, built on the stolen labor, diamonds and all that. But they had a long piece on Jane Goodall in this one. So that's the other reason I look through, because there's always something in here that might be interesting. This is what she said near the end of her life. I'm going to read it. Y'all read it from the screen. Y'all can see it. She says, when you die, you are either gone, snuffed out, finished, or there is something. I happen to believe there is something. So I can't think of a more exciting adventure than finding out what the something is. It's probably about as clear a way of knowing as you can express. Between everything that exists and us, is our capacity to interpret. But between our material reality, between our lived reality and us, there is language. Think of the thing that exists outside of us as the territory. Think of our attempt to narrate what we see in a way that reflects the reality as the map. Some of y'all know where I'm going with this. There was a quote from a guy, Alfred Zorbitsky, many years ago. It said, "Don't mistake the map for the territory. The map is not the territory. The representation of the thing is not the reality. The word is not the thing, except that the word is more than just your perception." That's why speech is important. That's why study is important. If you study, then the thing you say, the thing you communicate, the thing you express should vibrate and resonate with others. The best artists do that. We saw D'Angelo make transition. I was telling my students this week, say, "Hey man, do any of y'all know D'Angelo?" Now this is a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds mostly. And of course, they just lit up. Why? Because D'Angelo from their generation, they ain't 50. That's their parents' generation, but they grew up into that music, not directly, but that right layover generation, which is why I was talking with one of the students, and they were dragging Tyler, the Creator, apparently this week. I'm not into social media streets like that. So I said, "Why y'all dragging him?" Because he was talking about how much he loved D'Angelo and how it influenced his work. And they was like, "Yeah, it did influence his work, but your audience is white. I mean, so what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, y'all came for Tyler, the Creator." I was fascinated by this conversation. But my point is, they feel some kind of way about D'Angelo that they don't feel about Marvin Gaye or Aretha Franklin. They love them. They love Stevie Wonder, but D'Angelo closer to them in time and space. Again, cultural meaning making in our Africana space framework. What artists, what creatives in your time and space mark your moment in time and space? And then how do you stitch them together to previous generations' movement and memory? How do you remember that experience? And thinking about that in terms of D'Angelo, it makes me think that, what did D'Angelo express that resonated with you? It's not just his creative capacity, it's also the ability to express the territory with his map. But that map resonates with me. As Lamont was kidding, you singing a song untitled, and I don't even know any words. Well, first of all, listen a little closer. Second of all, even if you don't understand any of the words, you get that feeling. You get that way of knowing. You understand what that is. And so when Korbisky says, "Do not mistake, the map is not the territory," it's not. But between the map and the territory is our increasing effort to close that gap. That's what they're arguing about in the Louisiana case and the Alabama case. They argued it in voting rights. Is how we show up in the world reflected in how we describe how we show up in the world, and how does it enhance our common humanity? That's a different way of asking it. Anybody who's against that, you're a white supremacist in the United States of America. If you're white doing it, or if you're Negro serving a white supremacist, why wouldn't you want everybody to have basic health care and food? You got self-hatred you project outward, and you trying to figure out a way to ensconce it in the language of the governing documents of the social structure, and the plain language of the documents that people lost their lives to the tune of 600,000 people to result in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. You keep trying to rewrite them. And we see what you're doing. You know what you're doing. The only question is, we're going to let you do it. No kings, we continue. So closing that gap is important. Speech is important. And nothing is sadder, as Asa Hilliard would say, to be led by people who haven't done their homework. At its best, speech isn't just your perception. At its best, and by speech, I mean music, I mean art, I mean all forms, I mean Kerry James Marshall and D'Angelo. I mean Charles Wilbert White, and Lauryn Hill. I mean all of the convenings. At its best, speech is a collection of the best that has been thought and done and said. That's how Kwame talk about the ancient Egyptians. That's why we study ancient Egypt, and we study all of our African selves in a global sense. We're looking for the best that has been thought, the best that has been expressed, the best that has been said. We're looking to create better maps for the territory we call life and time and space. And as long as you can manage to convene it, that's what deepens your understanding. We don't want just a map from today. I want a map from 100 years ago. I want a map from 1,000 years ago. I want a map from 10,000 years ago. I want all those maps together, so when I project 10,000 years into the future, and 10 minutes from when we get off this conversation in a few minutes, I want us to be able to have that more strengthened. And I know we all do. But that means continuing to develop our deep capacity to be in conversation with that deep well of knowledge that Jacob Carruthers often talked about. And nothing, as his cousin Asa Hilliard would say, is sadder than to be led by people, or people to say that they're leaders and haven't done their homework. Mahmoud Mamdani Perhaps we know the last name. Do you know the last name Mamdani? Mahmoud Mamdani has just written a book. It just came out. This is the father of Zorhan Mamdani. This is the only Mamdani I really knew, to be honest, because I didn't know Zorhan Mamdani, backbencher in the New York legislature. Then he ran for mayor and he started making progress. Oh, where's Mamdani? Oh, Mahmoud. No, wait, that's not my. Where is he related? Oh, that's his son. This is the book, Slow Poison. Idi Amin, Yoweri Museveni, and the Making of the Ugandan State. Mahmoud Mamdani. His is the soon-to-be mayor's father. Mahmoud Mamdani, Herbert Lemon Professor of Government and Professor of Anthropology and Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies at Columbia University. He was director of the Makerere Institute of Social Research in Kampala, Uganda, from 2010 to 2022. His son grew up partially in Uganda. He got 2 passports. Y'all know that. His books include Neither Settler Nor Native, Citizen and Subject. That's the one I knew first. When Victims Become Killers, and Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. By the way, you want to throw your money in the trash, Bill Ackman? You got one scalp, you thought, with the president of Harvard, Claudia Gay. Now you put $1 million in some motion to stop Mamdani. I want you to spend $1 billion. Then maybe you'll be poor. We can forget about your ass, Mr. Hedge Fund billionaire. You ain't gonna control the people in New York City, you clown. But anyway, Slow Poison, I thought, is very interesting. Mamdani is a well-known name. Many people here who are here right now, y'all know this name very well. You know his work, you know his scholarship, you know his commitment, his political commitment. So his son is absolutely no surprise. For those of you who didn't know him, I'm sure many of you did, unlike me. His new book on this, he's talking about post-colonial Uganda and what emerges in Uganda. And I'm not going to get too deep into it. I'm going to read from the conclusion in a minute, but we do that study. We do the study. The reason I'm reading this is not only to deepen my understanding of what happened in East Africa, in this region in particular, in Uganda, in the years after coming out from under direct European rule, still trying to shake off, the effects, but also to draw parallels for now. What's going on now? It's very interesting. I know y'all saw the president of Madagascar had to get the hell out the country. This 51-year-old Andre Rajoelina. There's a drawing of him in today's Financial Times under Madagascar president ousted by Gen Z. Now, y'all know my quibbles with Generation A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever. I'm looking at William Strauss and Neil Howe's book, Generations, where they made up the platform that became baby boomers and Gen X. Intergenerational approaches, what Mariba Kelsey lays out in terms of rites of passage, and what the Jacob Carruthers and others talk about in this whole notion, all the rites of passage, what Omotoshio, Dan Black is talking. Why would you have these letters on people when you've got an intergenerational collective that makes up the community? Those letters are pursuant to, I think, what Jacob Carruthers writes about in Science and Oppression. You've created an ordinal classification and you're using numbers to do it, and you're giving identities to different groups based on the number. Very Western thing to do. Well, they're Gen Z, or they're Gen Xers. They're not going to be, well, I'm a millennial. You're the son or the daughter of somebody, the parent of somebody else, the uncle or cousin of somebody else. You're the teacher of someone else. You're the student of someone else. Stop labeling yourselves with these European labels, because at the base of those labels is conflict. It's a way of knowing that leads to separation, not togetherness. But at any rate, all that having been said, Madagascar president ousted by Gen Z. Now, watch this. Born in 1974 in Ansarabe, a city in the central highlands of Madagascar, Rajoelina was the son of an army colonel. He started as a teenage DJ, then launched an events business and bought a radio station. But his penchant for dramatic business stunts didn't always translate well into politics. Seizing on the popularity of the Hollywood film franchise Madagascar, he once offered international investors tax exemptions to import giraffes, zebras, and elephants from sub-Saharan Africa to boost tourism. No one took him up on the offer. As the country reeled from COVID-19, he also promoted drinking bleach. He also promotes, a herbal remedy called COVID Organics, based on a local plant, which he claimed would cure the illness in days. Under his rule, entrenched poverty and corruption have continued. Despite being a top global exporter of vanilla and rich in terms of gems and minerals, many of whom I'm sure found their way into How to Spend It Wisely magazine of the Financial Times every weekend, Madagascar's GDP per capita is about $500 and has barely budged in the past decade. Some 3/4 of its citizens live below the World Bank poverty line. Quote, in this country, the only way you can live well is if you have money. Us ordinary people are forced to live by different rules to politicians like Rajoelina, end quote, says Henrietta Anathizazo, a market trader. Quote, "We need to leave something better for the future generations. Rajoelina might have been a good DJ, but he wasn't a good president." The Apprentice clown, made in part by NBC. Shout out to now y'all worried. You should be worried. You made this monster. And the idiocracy we live in, to the tune of almost 80 million people, put him in office with a little voter suppression help, right? Greg Palast. And now we got to deal with an Andre Rajoelina in the United States of America. But guess what? They ain't put up with it in Madagascar. In fact, let me find the quote here. He says this. Says that no. This is I was reading a different article. It must have been. Yeah. Wait, no, here it is. I'm sorry. I went, let me let's go here. Give me a second here. He was 34 when he became the world's largest, youngest head of state. But these protests, here we go. Here we go. I'm looking for it now. Here we are. Even by Madagascar's tumultuous political standards, the speed of his downfall has been dizzying. In late September, students began demonstrations over chronic water and electricity shortages. The protests, inspired by similar Gen Z demonstrations in Nepal, Kenya, and Morocco, quickly morphed into widespread calls for an end to endemic corruption and poverty and his removal. Now they've got a major in the army who is taking over the head of state. They said they're going to have elections in 2 years. Who knows where it goes from now? But I'm putting it and linking it to what Mahmoud Mamdani is writing in Slow Poison for this reason. What we're seeing here in this No Kings protest is not the end. It's not even the beginning. It's the continuation of an ongoing rhythm in any country where, when the people who call themselves ruling over everyone else have gone too far, the people who make up the people who live in the place are going to push back and inevitably triumph over whoever that is, for good or for bad. Winter, little Russ Vogt, who nobody voted for. Winter, little fascist Stephen Miller with your stick white dreams. Little junior varsity Vance. Winter is coming. It always comes. And what Mamdani is writing here, which I'm reading with his son in mind in New York City, is very interesting to me. Let me read. Even as I think about in neighboring Kenya, the funeral this week of Raila Odinga, the son of Oginga Odinga. Jaramogi Odinga, who served in the government of Jomo Kenyatta, the first prime minister of Kenya, and then ultimately the son of Jomo Kenyatta and the son of Oginga Odinga duke it out in elections. And Raila Odinga never becomes the president of Kenya. The closest he gets is prime minister with Kenyatta. And even that is a compromise. But he always talked about the vision of what Kenya must be, the vision of what African countries must be. He was a Pan-Africanist. They laid his physical form to rest this week as he graduated into, as Jane Goodall said, what comes next? And he was the first, his daddy was the first person. His daddy was the first person to make contact and have conversation in a way with the so-called civil rights movement young people of the United States. I never forget that connection. In 2010, Shaw University got a chance to sit with and have a small conversation, just a few minutes, but it was always transformative to sit with an elder, with the great Matthew Jones, who wrote the Ballad of Medgar Evers and In the Mississippi River, the Snick Singers, and who wrote Oginga Odinga, as y'all have heard me sing many times. And it's been quite some time since I launched into a song, but I think about the fact that Oginga Odinga was a song that Matthew Jones wrote after the students in SNCC in Atlanta went to see the father of Raila Odinga, who was buried this week in Kenya. This titan really of trying to create governance formations that really spoke to the needs of the people. His father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, visiting the United States, being shepherded around by representatives of the U.S. social structure, coming to Georgia and then Atlanta and saying this city's too busy to hate and blah, blah, blah. But these young people said, we got something to talk to you. So they went to see him. And as Matthew Jones wrote and sang this with the SNCC Singers, and as I talked with him, asking him, man, tell me about Oginga Odinga, brother. I love that song. We went down to the Peachtree Manor. That's the hotel in Atlanta. They're singing, Matthew Jones wrote, to see Oginga Odinga. The police said, what's the matter? To see Oginga Odinga. The police, he looked mighty hard at Oginga Odinga. He got scared 'cause he was a ex-Mau Mau. To see Oginga Odinga. Oginga Odinga, Jomo Kenyatta was suspected and accused of this by the British colonial authorities, including the incoming Queen of England, Elizabeth, the one that died a couple of years ago, of being part of the Mau Mau, the Kenyan Land Freedom Army. They said, we're going to run these British out of our country. Eh? So Matthew Jones said, we went down to the Peachtree Manor to see him because they lied to that man. They telling him everything cool over here. We're going to go talk with him. And they got in and they talked to him. In fact, Mary King in her book, Freedom Song, says this is the first time that African people from, well, she didn't say African people. She's a white woman herself, but members of the so-called civil rights movement, young people, youth generation, met with an African from the emerging anti-colonial, now triumph over colonialism, newly independent African countries. Oginga meets with the SNCC students, and we went down to the Peachtree Manor to see Oginga Odinga. The police, social structure, said, National Guard, which the judges are saying that you can't deploy in Illinois yet, but he's gone to his friends in the Supreme Court. They just sent that up the rocket docket yesterday. We'll see what they say, whether it be Portland, whether it be Chicago. We know what you're trying to do here in D.C. We know what you're trying to do, and we know what your friends going to try to let you get away with, but the people are bigger than your friends. We went down to the Peachtree Manor to see Oginga Odinga. The police, the National Guard, your deputized ICE thugs and all the rest of these people said, what's the matter? To see Oginga Odinga. The police, he looked mighty hard at Oginga Odinga. He got scared because he was an ex-Mau Mau. Now he got scared because he was clinging to America. Now he got scared because he's a descendant of slave. He got scared because now you got a continental African talking with some Africans from Alabama, Mississippi, and some white kids who came from New York, and they sitting here talking about this, and then he goes into the chorus. Oginga Odinga, Oginga Odinga, Oginga Odinga of Kenya. Jones said, who? Then they repeated, Oginga Odinga, Oginga Odinga, Oginga Odinga of Kenya. Then they say the word uhuru. Uhuru. Freedom now. Uhuru is freedom in Kiswahili. Jomo Kenyatta named his son Uhuru, who ends up running against Riley Odinga to be the president of Kenya. Political rivals whose fathers were Pan-Africanists who brought it together. Jomo Kenyatta got his challenges too, but we all do. I'm bringing all this up for a reason. That moment of Pan-Africanism was memorialized by SNCC, as well as the East Africans. The second stanza, how does it go? The police, he said, Oginga said, look here, what's going on down in Selma? Talking to the imaginary white authorities. Now Matthew Jones is fantasizing about this conversation because now that Oginga has been hipped by his cousins in the States, he turns his attention to these social structure white people who telling him racism is cool and we want to work with you, meaning we want your natural resources. Oginga said, look here, what's going on down in Selma? If you white folks don't straighten up, I'm going to call Jomo Kenyatta. Who? Oginga Odinga. And if you listen to the live recording, you hear the people start, yeah, and they start clapping, This is a song that the SNCC singers sang on the evening in New York when Malcolm X, after hearing them say, I love this song. Let me tell you about Oginga Odinga. He walks through the politics and then introduces the woman who he said is the most fearless person he ever met, Fannie Lou Hamer. And then Fannie Lou Hamer takes the stage in New York and says Malcolm X, who later she would call the best friend I ever had, starts talking about politics in the United States. Y'all gonna stop lying on African people. And you're going to stop lying on our solidarity or not. You can keep vomiting that all you want. But I'm going to tell you right now, when you deepen your memory across time and space, you build the momentum necessary to break the back of any fascist attempt to stop you or anyone else from living your full lives as human beings. So Mandani says this in the conclusion of his book, Slow Poison. He says, Idi Amin Dada and Yoweri Kaguta Museveni were both responsible for shaping the post-independence Ugandan state. Both were forced to craft futures from cloth, not of their own making. You weave them together cloth, but you didn't make the cloth. You know how to sew, but your sewing is different depending on what your objectives are. What are you sewing together and what does it make? The criminal enterprise called United States of America was rotten cloth sewed together by criminals. And guess what? It was always destined to unravel. It unraveled in 1861 to 1865. And then we came in, new patches, and stitched together something a little different, maybe even transformatively different if you would allow this garment to breathe and replace the rest of those rotten patches. Oh, but no. After Reconstruction, they decided to rip parts of the garment and put that rotten cloth right back in. And then here we come in the 1950s and 60s and try to restitch it again with some new cloth and some older cloth that's older than all the cloth they brought with them to try to do something different. And it took them 60 years, didn't it, Federalist Society, to catch the car. Now you're going to put your rotten pieces back in? No, kings. Oh, we know how to sew. And we know your sewing is deficient. And don't listen to them three loudmouth Negroes over there with their inferior thread and no knowledge of cloth. Because they with you and y'all can stitch all them same funky ass garments y'all had together. We're gonna do a little tailoring, a little editing, a little remixing here. So he goes on and says this: theirs is a story, Mamdani writing about Amin and Museveni, who's still the president, by the way, in Uganda, and it breaks Mamdani's heart. This is where his son gets that notion from, as he has talked about, as Mamdani has talked about in previous books. When they said in the classroom, remember I told y'all, little Zohan Mamdani in Uganda, born in Uganda, got a Ugandan passport to this day. They said, everybody put their hand up if you're an Ugandan. The boy puts his hand up and said, you're not an Ugandan, you're an Indian. Little Zohan was offended. He said, no, I'm Ugandan. Because under Amin, you're supposed to be Ugandan first, right? I'm an Ugandan. I'm an African. Then you got American Negroes in this country, man. He said he put African down on his application for college. Yeah. What is an African? Go ask Steve Biko. You got a shirt with his face on it. Do you know anything about the Black consciousness movement of South Africa? Ask who's an African, who's not an African. How much of it is consciousness? How much of it is behavior? Anyway, he goes on and says, theirs is a story that addresses several predicaments. The first is the meaning of independence. Both Amin and Museveni believed they were continuing the struggle for independence, but their understanding of independence changed as they tasted its fruits. For Amin, the challenge of independence was to make Black rule meaningful by nurturing Black millionaires in place of wealthy Asians. Sounds like some American Negroes I know. Museveni used a different language to convey the same meaning. Uganda had to develop a Black middle class to safeguard its independence and develop the country. Sounds like some American Negroes I know. This is also a story of leaders who realized at precisely their moment of triumph that they lacked the resources to translate their vision into reality. In many ways, that's where we are now. We're going to kind of wind this up now for today. Think about that in the case of Mahmoud Mamdani's son, Zohan. You're talking about becoming a mayor of a city, New York City, where the white nationalists are they're attacking you. The bozo who's over the federal government now with this expansive notion of being a king because of this funky ass little Russell Vogt nasty piece of work and his little friend Stephen Miller nasty piece of work, think you can take our tax dollars and withhold them from some people and give them to other people based on your white supremacist fever dream. They're going to try to starve you of resources, federal resources in New York City, so you won't have the resources that you need to develop the kind of thing you want. And then if we're unintelligent, we will attack him as if it was his fault. Now, think about that. The same dilemma in different circumstances. Bill Ackman dropping $1 million in a nasty piece of work, wanting to control the map because he don't like the territory. So he's going to make a different map, act as a king maker. But there are no kings. There are only the people. The reality is very different from this attempt to write a map and make us look at that map as if it's the reality. That map is not real, doggone Christy Nome. That map is not real, Pam Blondie. That map is not real, little DEI peacock runt rooster at the Pentagon. It's not real, Pete Hegseth. The territory is much different. Don't listen to the MAGA Muppet. Don't listen to these people. When Janai Nelson says at the end of her arguments that we heard at the beginning, that if you don't make the 15th Amendment stand up, it's a parchment promise. It's consistent with European logic, as Marimba Amini would write in Urugu. It is a rhetorical ethic. They never meant it. They drew that map not to reflect the territory, but to react their fever dream. And then we took the map and made it look more like the territory by making it stand up, the 13th, 14th, the 15th Amendment. And they've been bitter ever since. Why? It's our map, not your map. No, we're going to do something a little different. Now, think about that. I want us to, as I close, think about some of the things that happened this week in a different little shade, put a little Africana studies lens on it. We saw the resignation of Admiral Alvin Halsey, the 33rd commander of the United States Southern Command. These are the military guys. You got AFRICOM. They put a white boy in there after they took the brother out, and he was talking crazy anyway about Burkina Faso and General Traore. But you know, that's what you got to do, following orders, whatever. You got the European theater, the European command. You got the Northern Command. You got the Southern Command. The Southern Command doesn't get the same kind of shine or resources or attention as the other commands. That's the Caribbean, Latin America. And it was led until this week by a black man. 37 years he had been in the branch of the military he chose, which was the Navy, 33rd commander of the U.S. Southern Command. Why? Because they out there committing murder in the damn Caribbean Sea, breaking all kind of laws, international roads like BB. They're friends, killing, and they violating U.S. law. Pete Hegseth, you're going to jail at some point if this country is going to be something other than what it has been to date. All y'all need to go to jail, and you should be in The Hague, Donald John Trump. Y'all out here just straight striking people, killing people. There was a story in the New York Times today about a family from Trinidad and Tobago. The brother is missing. They think he was on one of those boats. They're trying to confirm it. Alvin Halsey is like, I quit. Because remember that runt rooster with more makeup on than his wife strutting in front of Halsey and the rest of them generals and admirals at the in Virginia a couple of weeks ago. Saying, well, if you don't like it, you can leave. Halsey said, I can't be subject to this killing. We don't know why he left. I like to think, and I imagine at some point he will tell it because he ain't that old. He only graduated in 1988. So I did the math. I'm saying this dude been in the military his whole adult life. Maybe he'll tell it, but guess where he went to school? Where did he graduate from in 88 and get his initial commission in the Navy Officer Reserve? That would be Morehouse. Admiral Halsey's from Fort Valley, Georgia. He's a Morehouse College graduate. Computer science was his undergraduate major. Got his commission there. And understand, I'm thinking in terms of who we are to each other. We need to know some more about General Halsey. I went on, look, I saw a couple of times he was speaking in public. I hope he speaks a whole lot more. General, please. I hope that one of the things you will say publicly at some point is that I could not suborn the killing. Understand that. It's so very important. Russ Vogt, we know what you're doing. You're a nasty piece of work. And I said I was going to come back to this. As I'm closing, I want to mention that as well. When I say nasty piece of work, I was going through looking for the provenance of that phrase and came upon Bill Sapphire. And I know you remember this, Prof, as a journalist. Bill Sapphire, for many years in the New York Times, wrote a weekly column called On Language. And he talked about one, actually, and this is how the ancestors, that's how you know it's very, I just went looking for this a couple of days ago. And guess what the day of his article entitled Piece of Work, that was published on the 18th of October, 1987. Yes, 8 years ago to the day. See, I understand. People think, oh, no, people, atheists, agnostics. I understand. That's a way of knowing. I embrace it. I celebrate you. But see, I know there is an order. Because why would that come out today when I decided, don't think about this nasty piece of work. Let me go look. The 18th of October, the literal day we talking about it right now is the anniversary of it. He talks about it. He traces the provenance to a description of something oddball, eccentric, weird personalities, nasty pieces of work. When people talk about pieces of work, when I say a nasty piece of work, you almost don't have to say nasty. You can just say piece of work. Stephen Miller, Russell Vogt, y'all nasty pieces of work. And so now some of y'all in here right now, some of us in here right now, you're getting a check because you're a member of the military and they want to pay you. But Russell Vogt has said, because he's been stealing your tax money by not spending it, now they got a little pot. He said, we're going to pay the troops. And we're going to pay the troops with money that we saved by not spending it the way Congress was supposed to, that told us to spend it. Now, y'all know in the federal constitution, only one branch of government has the power to purse. We talked with Al Green about that this week. The Congress. Constitution say Congress the one spend money. Hey, Russell Vogt said, I got a workaround for that. We wait too late in the cycle so they can't meet to tell us not to spend it. We can spend it that way. This rescission, this pocket rescission business is a nasty piece of work. And so now the Democrats, some of them, they had a vote on this the other day. Democrats voted no. And so now you got the MAGA Muppet getting up, you liar, you little nasty piece of work, saying, well, they're against the troops. They're against the troops. They're against the troops. The Democrats are voting against the troops. No, what they're voting against is making your man, who you've already bowed down to as a king to everybody else. No kings. Because Article 2, that Donald Trump can't know nothing about the Constitution, but Russell Vogt then lipped this in his ear. Article 2, it gives me the power to do anything I want. Article 2. I can't make my hands small enough. Article 2. Nah, Chief. No. And now, with this no kings, Even as the Supreme Court looks like it's working desperately to give a white minority rule to these white nationalists for their indeterminable future, and to wipe out a third of the Congressional Black Caucus just in case some of them decide they're going to get out and do something different. Even as that happens, what must we be reminded? There are 330 million people in this country and 8+ billion around the world. And ultimately, these fascists, whether it be anyone, whether it be Amin in Uganda or Trump in the United States, can be overwhelmed by the power of our collective effort. No kings. And we draw the map. New maps, no kings. Our maps increasingly reflecting the reality can be much better. We don't go for these little maps that y'all have drawn. So I'm a pause there for now, and I want to just thank the people who came saw this week. I want to thank the Columbia Heights Education Campus, the Bell Multicultural High School. Y'all came to the Black University class. It was remarkable. They're taking the AP African American Studies course over there at Bell. Their teachers, these sisters from Ghana, the brother who coordinates AP is from Haiti. We had students from Ethiopia, students from here, the United States, all over, students from Mexico, students. I mean, it was brilliant. 30 students. They came into the Black University class. That's the second high school in the last 3 weeks that have come. And it was a remarkable conversation. Shout out to the elder who came down from New York, who her grandson goes to Howard. She just wanted to come sit in on the class. But of course, you can't just sit in and be an elder. So she spoke to the students near the end about the importance of study and the importance of connecting. And she brought her own experiences in as a deep student in New York and talking about John Henry Clark. It was just brilliant. We centered the Tuskegee student uprising this week. That was the book we read. My man, not Bill Jones. And Bill Jones was the leader of First World along with Mama Kefa Neptis. Matthew Jones, who of course wrote Oginga Odinga. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, the author of the Tuskegee student uprising, and Brian Jones at the New York Public Library. That was the book we had this week. And so we talked about that in the context. So how do we scale that? Again, the Black University course is coming. It's going to be public. Everybody going to be in it. And we're going to figure out how to bring all this memory together. How do we scale it? How do we scale this human condition? The rights of reading, the rights of work. We restore our capacity. Whether it be remembering people like George Washington Williams. And here, that's the address of the African American Civil War Memorial Museum, the largest monument with the greatest number of names on it anywhere in the country. This was the program Brother Frank and them had us do. We had a discussion on him, George Washington Williams, who conceived of the idea of telling the history of African people from the origins of humanity to now in the 19th century. We restore our capacity by spreading this. Not just institutions. Mackenzie Scott gave $63 million to Morgan State this week, the national treasure, as it is called. Shout out to the president of Morgan State, to all my friends and colleagues who are at Morgan State. Also, the Cultural Heritage Action Fund got $20 million from Mackenzie Scott. She said she gonna give her money away. We ain't got no billionaire in her class, and she gonna give it all away. Hey, we got that, but guess what? We got even more of. We got more people who can give $5, $1, $10. Keep narrative going, keep Nubia going, keep any platform that's doing what we're doing going as we increasingly build these networks and come forward. They're banning books, not in our space. What you doing? Come over here. You see the new superintendent of Oklahoma said, I ain't putting the Bible in every classroom. I wonder why. Ain't you a white nationalist? Kevin Stitt, the governor of Oklahoma, wouldn't have appointed you if you weren't a white nationalist. What happened to your little nasty piece of work who was there before? Oh, he went and the billionaires paid him. He gonna take the attack another way and get rid of the teachers unions if he can. Yeah, but y'all backed up off that. Why? People raised hell. So we're gonna stop there. That's what we have to do. Oh, muted.
Also this week, John, oh, that's why I'm muted. Okay, never mind.
I'm muted.
Okay, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, Olympics, 1968, Mexico City. Also this week, 30th anniversary of the Million Man March. So I just wanted to also, as we drop these breadcrumbs, remember.
Absolutely. Thank you. Got to remember that. I'll say I'm looking at this. Bishop Shaw says very dismissive to question a person's competence over even a fool has its purpose if it's put in the right place. Yes, I would point you again to Powell-Tep. Good speech can be found everywhere. Yes, absolutely. Here's the thing. How do you know somebody's a fool on a specific subject? Powell-Tep addresses that as well. He says when a fool is arguing and you know they don't know, just be quiet. He says bend your back, just listen. Why? Because if you're arguing and they don't know and you know, what's the point of beating them up? But he also says good speech can be found among everyone, but you got to have a standard for good speech. Otherwise, how do you know who's a fool? So, oh, I should mention, shout out to my, don't go anywhere, Pop. This is like 30 seconds. My girl, Shanice Thompson, Dr. Thompson, who is an associate professor at Howard. She's been doing this work since she was in Philadelphia Freedom Schools 20 some years ago. She's got a book talk tonight at Sankofa. This is her book, Oshun, Lemonade and Intertextuality, Afro-Atlantic Religion and Black Cultural Production. You know, I had to spring for the hardback because this is my kid right here. But she ain't no kid no more. She's a full-bred professor and in many ways my replacement. So we're going to be in conversation tonight at Sankofa at 6:30 if y'all want to come through for those. It'll be live streamed. So just go to Sankofa website and they're going to live stream it. They'll have the YouTube thing up. So shout out to them. Oh, it's my alma mater's homecoming. Got to do that. HBCU, that's why I'm running. My man, Lanny Smith. Hey, y'all, if you're at a HBCU that didn't give Actively Black permission, see, Actively Black is what they do. Tennessee State, you my people, right? Tennessee State. So they reached out to all the HBCUs and said, can we be licensed to make gear with y'all on it and we share the profits? One of the schools that said yes in the initial wave, I imagine much more once you see the quality, man, this is the stuff right here. Actively Black is no joke, right? Is Tennessee State. So I got a rep today. Shout out to the Tigers. I wish I was in Nashville for the game. They're playing Howard. How can I lose? I can't because it's only one HBCU with 107 different locations, but just the one that trained me. No Tennessee State, no me sitting here with y'all. So I wanted to just say that. Thanks. That's it. I'm done.
Okay.
All right. So Monday night, rites of passage, and then okay. So love you. I'll see y'all later. See y'all Monday night.
Okay.
Right.
Bye. See y'all tomorrow and on Monday.